Imagine discovering the ultimate blueprint for managing a modern high-stakes creative business. I mean, you aren't finding this secret in some sleek corporate boardroom overlooking Silicon Valley, right?
Right, definitely not there.
And you aren't finding it in a prestigious MBA syllabus at Harvard or Stanford either.
No, you are not.
Instead, you are standing in a sweltering, totally chaotic, high-pressure 1930s Parisian kitchen.
Oh man, just the visual there is intense.
Exactly. I mean, the air is thick with the smell of clarified butter and honestly burning adrenaline. You've got highly stressed, temperamental chefs literally throwing raw eggs at each other's heads while a line of waiters just screams for orders.
Which is, completely antithetical to everything we are taught about modern corporate hygiene and HR-approved management theory today.
Yeah, completely.
We're so conditioned to think of effective leadership as something sterile, something measurable and perfectly calm. But the reality of generating world-class creative output is often just profoundly messy.
And that tension is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive. How do you take a room full of brilliant, high-strung, eccentric people who are fundamentally temperamental, sensitive, and prone to dramatic outbursts and forge them into a unified, world-beating team?
It's the million-dollar question, really.
It is. So today, we're unpacking the opening chapter of a foundational text in the business world, which is David Ogilvy's classic, Confessions of an Advertising Man. Specifically, we're diving into his masterclass on how to manage an advertising agency.
And, the profound value here extends far beyond just the advertising industry.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you are managing a team of software engineers or running a biotech research lab, directing a film, or honestly simply trying to understand the psychological levers of human performance, the underlying architecture of leadership is exactly the same.
Right. The principles translate anywhere.
They really do. This text reveals how the grueling, intensely physical world of a grand hotel kitchen in France directly built the management philosophy of one of the most iconic companies in history.
Yeah.
It requires this incredibly delicate, almost paradoxical balance. I mean, you have to enforce an uncompromising, ironclad discipline while simultaneously constructing a psychological fortress where creative mavericks feel safe enough to actually produce genius.
So let's start with the man who originated this entire philosophy.
Okay.
Because before David Ogilvy became this titan of Madison Avenue, he spent time in the 1930s working as a chef at the Hotel Majestic in Paris.
Right, the famous Hotel Majestic.
Yeah, and the undisputed ruler of that kitchen was a head chef named Monsieur Petard. Petard represents the absolute archetype of the leader as the supreme master.
The supreme master. I love that term.
Right. As the head chef of this massive operation, he actually spent the vast majority of his time doing administrative work.
Which makes sense for an operation that size.
Totally. He was in his glass-walled office, planning menus, scrutinizing vendor bills, routing supply, yeah, all the boring stuff. But every once in a while, Petard would step out of that glass cage into the sheer chaos of the kitchen.
You just walk right onto the floor.
Exactly. He would take over a station, and he would cook something flawlessly.
See, and he was engineering a highly specific psychological moment there.
How so?
Well, he wasn't cooking because they were short-staffed. That wasn't the point at all. He was stepping onto the floor to reestablish his unassailable right to lead.
Oh, I see.
Because when a leader removes themselves entirely from the craft to focus purely on management, this subtle rot begins to take hold in the culture. The frontline workers, the people actually chopping the onions or writing the code, they begin to suspect that management no longer understands the realities of the work.
Which happens all the time today, right?
All the time. But Petard, stepping out of his office and executing a flawless dish, completely neutralizes that doubt. He is proving that his authority is derived not from a title, but from absolute mastery of the craft.
That is so powerful. And Ogilvy actually mirrors this exact behavior decades later when he's running his ad agency.
He does, yeah.
He writes that he would occasionally take a brief, sit down, write the copy, and construct an advertisement himself. And he did this specifically to prove to his brigade of highly paid, highly arrogant copywriters that his hand had not lost its cunning.
It's such a flex.
It really is. It reminds me of like a senior software architect who spends all week in Jira tracking sprint velocities, right? But then every few months, they just drop a massive, flawless, bug-free pull request on a really complex feature.
Yes. Exactly that.
It's just a reminder to the junior devs of exactly who they're dealing with.
And it immediately silences any whispers of incompetence. I mean, creative professionals deeply resent incompetent management. They absolutely abhor being directed by someone who couldn't do the job themselves.
Nobody likes that.
No. If a copywriter suspects their boss can't write a compelling headline, or, a line cook thinks the head chef's palate is compromised, all foundational respect just vanishes. Management simply becomes an obstacle rather than a guiding force.
But Petard didn't just rely on those occasional displays of virtuosity. He actually weaponized his own physical endurance.
Oh, hours.
The hours were insane. Petard worked 77 hours a week. He took one single free day every fortnight.
That is just grueling.
Right. And Ogilvy mimics this intense schedule at his agency later on. He operated on the theory that his staff will be far less reluctant to work grueling overtime if they actually see the boss working even longer hours.
There's that great letter in the text from an executive who was leaving the agency, right?
Yes. The departing executive writes to Ogilvy, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like, "You set the pace on doing homework. It is a disconcerting experience to spend a Saturday evening in the garden next door to your house, carousing for 4 hours, while you sit unmoving at your desk by the window doing your homework."
No.
The word gets around.
The word gets around. I mean, the sheer visibility of that effort is a form of silent coercion.
Violent coercion, yeah.
It creates an environment where complaining about workload feels entirely illegitimate. The leader has absorbed the maximum amount of pain, setting the ceiling for acceptable commitment.
I have to challenge this a bit, though, because, is a 77-hour work week actually sustainable, or is it just the 1960s version of toxic hustle culture?
It's a very fair question.
Right. We know now that cognitive function drops off a cliff after about 50 hours of deep work. It feels like that classic military analogy of leading from the front, but taken to a punishing extreme that basically guarantees burnout. How do we reconcile this with modern understandings of productivity?
Well, that is the essential friction of this model. From a purely physiological standpoint, 77 hours of high cognitive load work is completely unsustainable for the vast majority of human beings.
Yeah, you just crash.
You would. But we have to look at the function it serves within the ecosystem of a highly ambitious organization. It is less about the literal output of those 77 hours and more about the cultural signaling.
The signaling.
Right. The leader is demonstrating that the mission of the organization transcends normal professional boundaries. It's a signaling mechanism that basically says, we are playing a different game than our competitors.
So it's about setting the standard.
Exactly. For anyone trying to build a world-class team today, you might not require 77 hours, but the core mechanism remains. You cannot demand an obsessive level of dedication from your team if you treat your own role as just a casual 9-to-5 commitment.
That makes total sense.
Your team will always modulate their effort to sit just below yours. If you want extraordinary effort, your own effort must be visibly, undeniably extraordinary.
Visibility is key there. And while Petard's work ethic was a constant visible force, his use of praise was the exact opposite.
Well, he was famously stingy with praise.
Incredibly stingy. Petard ruled the majestic kitchen with a rod of iron. The cooks were terrified of him. He sat in his glass cage, which was the ultimate symbol of unapproachable authority. And crucially, he praised his staff very, very rarely.
What, when he did, it meant everything.
Exactly. When he did offer a compliment, it felt like a monumental, life-altering achievement. There is this vividly detailed anecdote in the text about frogs' legs that captures this dynamic perfectly.
It really is perhaps the most revealing psychological portrait in the entire chapter.
Okay, so the scene is set during this massive banquet at the Hotel Majestic. The president of France is attending.
No pressure.
Right, no pressure at all. The atmosphere in the kitchen is absolute pandemonium. And in the middle of this high-pressure crucible, the young author is tasked with preparing the frog's legs.
A very delicate dish.
Very. He describes the agonizing, delicate process of covering these tiny thighs with a white chaud-froid sauce.
Which is incredibly tricky to work with.
Right, it's a highly temperature-sensitive sauce that has to be applied perfectly so it sets into a smooth glaze. So he's meticulously decorating each individual leg with a single ornate leaf of chervil. Suddenly, he realizes Petard has left his glass office and is standing right beside his station, silently watching him work.
The physiological response from the author is immediate here. He actually notes his knees were knocking together and his hands were trembling.
I would be terrified.
The sheer proximity of the Supreme Master induces a state of near panic.
So Petard just watches the trembling cook. He doesn't say a word. He slowly takes the pencil, tucked into his starched toque, his chef's hat, and he waves it in the air.
And that's a massive signal.
Yes, in this kitchen, that gesture is the absolute command for the entire brigade of 37 chefs to drop whatever they are doing and gather around.
Could you imagine the silence that fell over that
It
kitchen?
must have been deafening. So Petard points at the plate of frog's legs, and he says very slowly and very quietly to the entire kitchen, "That's how to do it."
The impact of those 5 words is just astronomical.
It really is. The author writes simply, "I was his slave for life."
Wow.
It's an incredible reaction, and it feels like praise inflation in modern corporate culture has completely destroyed this dynamic today.
Oh, completely.
It reminds me of the Weimar Republic printing endless stacks of money until wheelbarrows of cash couldn't even buy a loaf of bread. If a manager drops a great job team into the Slack channel for every minor routine task that gets completed, the words lose all their meaning. The currency is entirely devalued.
Praise inflation is a chronic disease in modern management. It really is. It stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of motivation. Managers often distribute constant low-level praise because they want to be liked, or, they want to manufacture a quote-unquote positive environment.
Which sounds good on paper.
It does, but human beings, particularly highly skilled creative professionals, are remarkably adept at detecting unearned validation. When you praise mediocre or merely adequate work, you are implicitly telling your highest performers that their exceptional effort is not actually differentiated from baseline competence.
So you are basically robbing the top performers of the validation they actually crave.
Precisely. By withholding praise, Petard turned it into a highly scarce, highly sought-after commodity. It operated on a schedule of intermittent reinforcement, which, psychologists have long known is the most powerful driver of behavioral conditioning.
So when he finally gives it, it hits harder.
Exactly. When the praise was finally given, it wasn't a casual pleasantry. It was a profound public validation of the worker's mastery. And Ogilvy explicitly imports this tactic to his agency later. He praises his staff rarely, intentionally hoping that they will appreciate a single moment of genuine recognition far more than a steady, meaningless gush of corporate appreciation.
That makes a lot of sense. And Petard also amplified the value of the work by creating a profound sense of occasion.
That sense of
He
occasion.
didn't just tell the cooks they were doing a good job, he connected them directly to the impact of their labor. The author tells another story where he prepares a highly complex soufflé Rothschild, which is infused with 3 different liqueurs.
It's a culinary tightrope walk.
Total tightrope walk. So instead of just having a waiter take it away, Petard physically takes the young cook upstairs, out of the sweltering kitchen, to the door of the dining room. And he allows him to stand there and watch President Paul Dahmer eat the soufflé.
See, that completely collapses the distance between the grueling labor of creation and the ultimate moment of consumption.
You actually see the result.
Right. The cook sees the joy on the face of the head of state. The work is no longer just a task, it becomes an event of national significance.
And Ogilvy captures that exact feeling of a state occasion in his agency. He knows that when a massive crisis hits, like, say, a campaign goes off the rails, or a client demands a complete overhaul at the last minute, and the staff has to work all night long, pulling together to solve a major problem, their morale stays incredibly high for weeks afterward.
Because of that shared sacrifice.
Yes, the shared sacrifice.
Yeah.
But withholding praise and creating a sense of occasion only works if the team deeply respects your baseline standards. And Petard's baseline wasn't just high, it was ruthless,
Ruthless is the word.
which introduces this concept of exorbitant standards and absolute intolerance for incompetence.
Yeah, the author references William Gladstone here, the 19th century British Prime Minister, who famously stated that the first essential for a Prime Minister is to be a good butcher.
A good butcher.
It is a brutal, visceral metaphor for leadership.
It really is. And Petard was the ultimate butcher. The author witnessed Petard fire 3 pastry cooks in a single month for the exact same infraction.
And it wasn't for something massive either.
No. They didn't burn down the hotel. They didn't steal from the larder. They were fired simply because they could not make the caps on their brioches rise evenly in the oven.
Now, to an outsider, firing a chef over an uneven pastry cap seems like the definition of a toxic, tyrannical workplace. It just seems petty.
It does seem really extreme.
But we have to look at the mechanism of what is actually happening. Baking a brioche requires a fundamental mastery of yeast activation, temperature control, and proofing times. If a pastry cook cannot control the rise of a brioche cap, they lack foundational competence.
They don't have the basics down.
Right. And Petard understood that tolerating that incompetence is deeply demoralizing to the rest of the brigade. If you force an A player to work alongside a C player whose mistakes they constantly have to fix, the A player will eventually leave.
They'll just get fed up.
Exactly. The standard of the kitchen is defined not by the best dish you serve, but by the worst dish you allow to leave the pass. Firing those pastry cooks was a protective measure for the elite culture he was building.
That is a great way to frame it, a protective measure. And that standard extended far beyond the oven and directly into client service, too. Petard enforced a strict plat du jour rule.
Oh, this rule is wild.
It's absolute madness. The rule was absolute. Never, ever tell a waiter that the kitchen is fresh out of the dish of the day. The author tells a story about almost getting fired for violating this. He casually told a waiter they were out of a dish, just assuming it would take far too long to cook a completely new batch from scratch in the middle of a rush.
And the text details the staggering complexity of what that dish might have been, just to underscore the perceived impossibility of the situation.
Right, he writes that it might have been the coulibiac de saumon, which, isn't just throwing a piece of salmon on a grill.
Not at all.
It is an insanely complicated Russian kedgeree. It requires the spine marrow of sturgeon, semolina kash, salmon collops, mushrooms, onions, and rice, all rolled up in a delicate brioche paste and baked for 50 minutes.
Just reading that makes me stressed.
Right. Or he notes it might have been Carolie eclairs, which were stuffed with a puree of woodcock's entrails cooked in champagne, covered with a brown chaud-froid sauce and masked with game jelly. I mean, the sheer culinary madness and prep time required for these dishes makes running out seem like an unavoidable reality of the business.
But Petard's response reveals the underlying psychology of luxury service.
What did he do?
Well, Petard stops him and says, "Next time you see that we are running out of a plat du jour, come and tell me. I will then get on the telephone to other hotels and restaurants until I find one which has the same dish on its menu. Then I will send you in a taxi to bring back a supply. Never again tell a waiter that we are fresh out of anything."
It is completely irrational from a financial or logistical standpoint. Sending a cook in a taxi across Paris to buy a dish from a competitor just to serve it in your own dining room is madness.
Total madness.
But it reminds me of Amazon Prime guaranteeing 2-day delivery, even if it means putting a single $5 toothbrush on a private cargo jet. It is about protecting the brand promise at all costs.
It is about protecting the illusion of infinite abundance and infallible execution. The moment you tell a luxury client no, you break the spell. You remind them of the logistical constraints of the real world.
You ruin the magic.
Exactly. Petard was not selling food. He was selling an uninterrupted experience of perfection. And Ogilvy ports this exact intolerance for dropping standards into his advertising agency.
Does he use taxis too?
In a way. He admits to seeing red if anyone at his agency tells a client they cannot produce a television commercial or a print advertisement on the day they promised it. He establishes the ethos that in the best establishments, promises are always kept, regardless of the agony or overtime it costs the staff behind the scenes.
And this uncompromising standard wasn't just about output either. It was about fundamental morality. The text shares a crucial story about a massive moral dilemma the author faced in the kitchen.
This one is intense.
Very. The chef garde-manger, which is the pantry chef responsible for the coal stores, sent the author a batch of raw sweetbreads to cook. But the meat smelled entirely putrid.
Ah, terrible.
Right. The author knew instinctively that serving this meat would physically endanger the life of the client. However, sweetbreads are often served with a heavy, highly seasoned sauce. That sauce would entirely mask the smell and the taste of the rotting meat. The client would eat it happily and only know something was wrong when they became violently ill hours later.
And the structural trap here is fascinating.
Why is that?
Well, the pantry chef ordered the author to cook the bad meat anyway, because the pantry chef was terrified of getting in trouble with Petard for mismanaging the inventory and running out of fresh supplies. He was trying to cover up his own logistical failure by risking the client's health.
So the author is caught in a terrible bind. He notes he was raised to believe that it is deeply dishonorable to be an informer, a snitch. But the safety of an oblivious client was hanging in the balance.
So what does he do?
He makes a choice. He takes the putrid sweetbreads directly to Petard's glass office and silently invites him to smell them.
Wow.
And Petard doesn't ask for an explanation. He doesn't say a single word to the author. He walks straight out of his office, marches over to the chef garde manger, and fires him on the spot.
Just like that.
Just like that, the pantry chef had to pack his knives and leave the building immediately.
Now, firing the chef without a formal investigation or a conversation might give a modern HR department a heart attack.
Absolutely, it would be a lawsuit waiting to happen today.
Right. But we have to look at the cultural mechanism here. People in creative agencies, or any organization really, monitor the ethical boundaries of their leadership relentlessly.
We watch everything.
They do. If a team catches their leader engaging in unprincipled opportunism, if they see the leader cutting corners on safety, lying to a client, or tolerating unethical behavior to save a few dollars, the moral authority of the leader is permanently fractured.
You can't come back from that.
No. Petard demonstrated in 5 seconds that the safety of the client and the integrity of the kitchen superseded any internal hierarchy or inventory problem. Ethics were simply non-negotiable.
That concept of non-negotiable standards applied to the physical environment as well. Ogilvy mentions George Orwell's famous book Down and Out in Paris and London, where Orwell describes the horrifying, filthy conditions of French hotel kitchens.
Yeah, Orwell painted a pretty grim picture.
He did, but Ogilvy states that Orwell clearly never set foot inside the Majestic. Petard was a complete martinet about cleanliness. The massive wooden larder table where the meat was prepped had to be physically scraped down with a sharp carpenter's plane twice a day to expose fresh, clean wood.
That is dedication.
The floor was scrubbed and covered in clean sawdust twice a day. A dedicated bug catcher scoured the kitchen every single week. Every chef had to report for duty in a spotless, perfectly clean white uniform every single morning.
And this physical discipline translates directly into cognitive discipline.
Absolutely. When Ogilvy built his agency, he enforced the strict rule that his staff had to keep their offices immaculately shipshape. He believed a messy office covered in coffee cups and loose files creates an atmosphere of sloppiness.
It reflects the mind.
Exactly. That physical sloppiness inevitably leads to sloppy strategic thinking and the catastrophic disappearance of secret client papers. It is the exact equivalent of the broken windows theory used in urban policing.
Yeah, the broken windows theory posits that visible signs of disorder and neglect, like a single broken window left unfixed in a neighborhood, signal that no one is in charge and no one cares. This implicitly encourages further, more serious disorder.
So you fix the window immediately.
Right. If a kitchen larder is filthy, the cooks will subconsciously start treating the ingredients with disrespect. If an office is buried in visual clutter, the cognitive load on the brain increases. The brain has to constantly filter out the mess, leaving less processing power for deep, creative problem solving. Enforcing a pristine physical environment is a way of clearing the cognitive runway for the team.
So we have this environment of terrifyingly high standards, brutal hours, and intense scrutiny. How does an individual contributor actually survive and thrive in this crucible?
That's the real trick.
The chapter transitions brilliantly into what we can call the art of indispensability. It gives us a masterclass in how an employee can secure their own position, regardless of how chaotic the workplace might be.
This is a masterclass in defensive career strategy through offensive value creation.
Yes. And it comes through the glorious, highly specific story of the baked apple.
I love this story.
It's so good. The Majestic had a very important American client, a wealthy woman who occupied a massive suite of 7 rooms in the hotel. She was on a very strict medical diet that required her to eat a baked apple at every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
That's a lot of apples.
A lot of apples. But she was incredibly demanding about the aesthetic of this apple. She actually threatened to move her entire lucrative account down the street to the rival Ritz Hotel unless her baked apple was always served perfectly burst. The skin had to split in a very specific, visually pleasing way from the steam pressure.
Which is a seemingly simple request, but fraught with the danger of inconsistency. I mean, a natural apple will burst unpredictably based on its water content and the ambient humidity of the oven.
Exactly. You can't just set a timer and guarantee it. So what does the young author do? He doesn't just throw an apple in the oven and pray to the culinary gods that it bursts correctly. He entirely re-engineers the concept of a baked apple.
He goes full scientist on it.
He does. He develops a bespoke, highly labor-intensive technique. He takes 2 apples and bakes them both. He then takes a tamis, a fine mesh culinary sieve, and painstakingly forces the hot flesh of both apples through the mesh to completely remove every microscopic trace of the core, the seeds, and the fibrous casing.
So it's just pure apple flesh.
Right. Finally, he takes the smooth, sieved flesh of both apples and meticulously stuffs all of it back into a single apple skin.
He creates a structurally impossible hyper apple.
A hyper apple, I love that. He describes the result as the most voluptuous baked apple the client had ever seen in her life. It was aesthetically perfect, perfectly textured, and contained far more calories than his strict doctor ever suspected, because it was literally 2 entire apples hiding inside one skin.
And the result of this culinary engineering?
Word came down directly from the hotel's senior management that the specific chef who was baking those apples for the American client must be given absolute tenure. He was untouchable. He could not be fired under any circumstances. He made himself utterly indispensable to a key account.
The psychology of what he accomplished here moves far beyond mere customer service. Customer service is baking an apple because the client asked for one. What he executed was bespoke problem solving that generated a profound lock-in effect.
A lock-in effect, yes.
He anticipated the client's underlying desire for a specific aesthetic and textural experience, and he engineered a proprietary process to guarantee it flawlessly every single time.
This is exactly like a B2B SaaS company landing a massive enterprise whale client. And instead of just giving them the standard software login, they build a completely custom, highly complex API endpoint that integrates seamlessly into the client's legacy mainframe.
That is the perfect modern equivalent.
You stop being a replaceable vendor and you become load-bearing infrastructure.
Exactly. If that American woman threw a tantrum and moved to the Ritz Hotel, the chefs at the Ritz would simply bake her a standard apple. She would take one bite, realize it lacked the impossibly smooth, voluptuous texture of the Majestic's double apple, and she would immediately return.
Take it right back.
She would. The takeaway is that indispensability is not about working harder than everyone else. It is about engineering a delightful, customized solution that makes it literally unthinkable for a client or an employer to seek alternatives. You create a barrier to exit through exceptional, tailored value.
That level of obsessive, creative problem-solving is exactly what Ogilvy was looking for when he left the kitchen and started building his advertising agency. He takes these lessons from Petard and applies them to managing what he identifies as the creative maverick.
And we know how tricky mavericks can be.
Oh, definitely. And the text makes it very clear that the characters working in the Parisian kitchen were just as eccentric, if not more so, than the copywriters and art directors on Madison Avenue.
Because creative professions inherently attract a highly specific, often difficult personality architecture.
Right. Ogilvy leans on the insights of Dr. William Menninger, a prominent psychiatrist. Menninger's argued that to be successful in the advertising industry, an executive has to accumulate a group of highly creative people. By statistical definition, that means managing a fairly high percentage of individuals who are high-strung, brilliant, eccentric nonconformists.
And we saw the violent foreshadowing of this temperament in the kitchen.
We absolutely did.
Yeah.
The cooks were fundamentally unhinged. There's the story of the chef potager, the soup chef.
Oh, the soup chef story.
It's wild. The author casually raided the soup chef's precious stock pot to grab some boiled bones to feed a wealthy client's poodles. The soup chef snapped. He completely lost his mind and threw 47 raw eggs across the kitchen directly at the author's head, scoring 9 direct, painful hits.
A staggering display of temper, but also, one must note, remarkable accuracy under pressure.
9 out of 47 isn't bad. And then you have the chef Patissier, the pastry chef. Every single night, this man left the hotel with a whole stolen roast chicken hidden inside the high crown of his Homburg hat.
A whole chicken.
A whole chicken. And when the pastry chef went on his annual vacation, he forced the young author to 24 fresh peaches into the legs of his long underwear to smuggle them out past the hotel security.
It is pure, unfiltered eccentricity. But the text provides a crucial counterweight to this madness. What else do we learn about this peach-smuggling, hat-wearing pastry chef?
We learn that when the King and Queen of England were given a massive state dinner at the Palace of Versailles, this exact same roguish, deeply eccentric genius was chosen from among all the pastry chefs in the entire nation of France to prepare the ornamental baskets of spun sugar in the Petit Fours glasses for the monarchs.
And there is the central paradox of managing creative output. You cannot cleanly separate the genius from the madness.
They come as a package deal.
They do. The cognitive mechanisms that allow a person to visualize intricate spun sugar baskets for a king, or write a headline that changes global consumer behavior are often the exact same mechanisms that make them hypersensitive, prone to dramatic outbursts, and entirely resistant to normal corporate behavioral norms. You have to tolerate and even protect the eccentricity to harvest the genius.
But how do you prevent that eccentricity from burning the agency to the ground? Because Ogilvy notes that cooks, exactly like copywriters, work under ferocious deadlines and intense pressures, making them apt to be quarrelsome.
Very quarrelsome.
Right. In the agency environment, this manifests not as throwing eggs, but as intense, petty sibling rivalry. He observes that his employees watch each other with a jealous paranoia to see who gets a carpet in their office first, who gets assigned an assistant first, or who negotiates an extra $5 in their paycheck.
The psychological framing Ogilvy uses here is profound. He correctly identifies that these vicious office politics are rarely about the actual carpet or the assistant.
It's about something deeper.
Exactly. These material perks are merely proxies. What the creative mavericks are actually fighting for is the validation of their standing with father.
So the executive is forced into the role of the father figure. Now, I know the father figure framing can sound slightly paternalistic or outdated to a modern ear, but it's just a fundamental reality of how human beings operate in hierarchical structures.
In high-pressure, creatively demanding environments, transference is almost inevitable. Employees project their familial dynamics, their need for approval, and their sibling rivalries onto the leadership structure. The executive assumes the psychological weight of the parent.
That's a heavy burden.
It is. And Ogilvy argues that to be a successful leader in this dynamic, you must be understanding, deeply considerate, and human enough to be genuinely affectionate. He describes assembling his nearly 500 staff members in an auditorium once a year to give them a completely candid, transparent report on the agency's operations, profits, and failures.
He levels with them.
He does. He treats them like adults, telling them precisely what behaviors he admires and what behaviors he fundamentally despises. He is setting the boundaries of the household.
And he lays down incredibly rigid rules to prevent this sibling rivalry from metastasizing into toxic, destructive politics. For instance, he enforces an inviolable rule against employing spouses or allowing any form of nepotism.
A strict no-spouse rule.
Very strict. He states flatly that spouses breed politics. If two employees at the agency meet and get married, one of them is required to resign and leave the company. That feels incredibly harsh today.
It is draconian for sure, but it is born of a desire to protect the psychological safety of the broader team. A married couple within a hierarchical team creates an unbreachable voting bloc.
Oh, that makes sense.
It creates a perceived back channel to leadership that terrifies the rest of the staff. By eliminating it entirely, he maintains a level playing field. He also openly despises toadies, the people who suck up to their bosses. He astutely notes that the person who flatters their superior is almost universally the exact same person who brutally bullies their subordinates.
He also tackles the nature of communication and conflict head-on. He abhors quarrelsome people and those who wage paper warfare.
Paper warfare is the worst.
It really is. It's the classic corporate maneuver of sending a passive-aggressive, highly documented memo or copying a boss on an email chain instead of just walking down the hall and talking out a disagreement.
Just toxic.
Right. To demand absolute candor over bottled-up resentment. He quotes a haunting poem by William Blake. He goes, "I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow."
It is a beautiful, piercing encapsulation of conflict resolution. Do not let resentment fester in the dark. Address it directly, verbally, and openly.
Nip it in the bud.
Exactly. The environment must be stable enough to absorb direct confrontation. You have to be the stabilizing, affectionate, yet unyielding force that absorbs the anxiety of these high-strung nonconformists, ensuring their energy is directed at the creative problem, not at each other.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. We know how to manage the creative mavericks once they are safely inside the building. But how do you find them in the first place?
The million-dollar question again.
Right. How do you sift through thousands of resumes to identify the rare individuals who actually have the raw capacity to create brilliant, culture-shifting work? This is about finding the fire in the belly.
Identifying actual creative horsepower is perhaps the most difficult task of any agency head or tech founder.
Ogilvy mentions that during this era, creativity was just beginning to become a subject of formal study by psychologists. He references the work of Dr. Frank Barron at the University of California, who was conducting deep research into the characteristics of highly creative individuals.
Barron's findings were groundbreaking.
They really were. His psychometric findings are fascinating. He found that highly creative people are exceptionally observant and place a massive premium on telling themselves the truth, even when it is uncomfortable.
They don't lie to themselves.
Exactly. They possess a greater physiological brain capacity to hold and compare dozens of contradictory ideas at once to synthesize richer solutions. They possess vigorous psychic and physical energy. Their internal universes are infinitely more complex than the average person's.
And perhaps most crucially, Barron found that creative geniuses have significantly more contact than average people do with the life of the unconscious mind, with fantasy, reverie, and the untamed world of imagination.
But while waiting for psychologists to perfect these psychometric tests, Ogilvy had to rely on his own empirical, highly aggressive, hands-on techniques for spotting what he called creative dynamos.
His methods were quite direct.
His methods are borderline guerrilla recruiting. Whenever he sees a remarkable paradigm-shifting advertisement in a magazine or a brilliant television commercial on the air, he doesn't just admire it and move on. He actively hunts down the specific individual who wrote it.
He just tracks them down.
Yes. He finds their number, calls the writer directly on the telephone out of the blue, and congratulates them on their brilliance.
It is a wildly effective recruiting tactic. It strokes the ego of a creative person who is likely feeling underappreciated at their current job, and it immediately opens a direct line of communication with the CEO of a rival agency.
Exactly. He notes that because his agency has carefully cultivated a reputation as a great place for creative people to work, that single phone call almost always immediately produces a job application.
It's brilliant.
And once the candidate is engaged, he asks them to send him the 6 best advertisements they have ever written.
See, this is a vital diagnostic step. Anyone can have one lucky hit. But asking them to curate their own top 6 reveals if the candidate can actually recognize greatness when they see it.
It tests their taste.
It does. It reveals if their past success was actually their own genius, or if it was just the result of having a highly competent supervisor fixing their mediocre drafts before they were published.
But Ogilvy goes even further, and this is where it gets incredibly personal. He sometimes calls on his victim, as he jokingly refers to the candidate, at their actual home.
He just invites himself over.
He does. He claims that within 10 minutes of crossing the threshold of their house, he can tell everything he needs to know. He looks at the books on their shelves, the art on their walls. He assesses if the candidate possesses a richly furnished mind, what kind of underlying taste they have, and most importantly, if they seem fundamentally happy and stable enough to survive the terrifying pressure cooker of his agency.
He is evaluating the entire psychological ecosystem of the person, not just a curated portfolio of their past work. A portfolio tells you what they did. A richly furnished mind tells you what they are capable of doing next.
It reminds me of elite scouting in professional sports. A great scout doesn't just look at the NFL combine stats, like how fast a guy runs the 40-yard dash. They go to his hometown, they watch the game tape, they talk to his high school coach, they see how he treats the equipment manager.
You have to look at the whole picture.
Right. They're looking for the intangible drive. And Ogilvy has a very distinct preference for where this drive comes from. He receives hundreds of polished applications a year from the Ivy League, but he is particularly interested in the raw talent emerging from the American Middle West.
He loved the Midwesterners.
He really did. He states he would much rather hire an ambitious, hungry young man from Des Moines, Iowa, than a high-priced, smoothly polished executive from a fashionable Madison Avenue agency. He finds those Madison Avenue grandees to be coldly correct and critically dull.
He is actively prioritizing raw, unbridled vitality over polite corporate mediocrity.
He perfectly captures this philosophy by quoting a poem by Roy Campbell, originally written about overly polite South African novelists. He recites, "You praise the firm restraint with which they write." I'm with you there, of course. They use the snaffle and the curb all right, but where's the bloody horse?
Where's the bloody horse? It is a magnificent metaphor for the modern corporate world.
It really hits hard.
The snaffle and the curb are the harnesses, the tools of restraint. They represent the HR guidelines, the style guides, the Six Sigma processes, the conventional good manners of polite corporate life.
All the rules.
Right. You can have the most perfectly designed, diamond-encrusted snaffle and curb in the world, but all of that restraint is completely, utterly useless if you don't have the raw, powerful, untamed energy of the actual creative horsepower to drive the carriage forward. Companies today spend millions of dollars polishing the curb and completely forget to breed the horse.
That's such a great point. He also mentions a strong preference for hiring expatriates from Western Europe, finding them to be exceptionally well-educated, hardworking, less bound by American conventions, and more objective about analyzing the American consumer.
It gives them a fresh perspective.
Exactly. But finding the horse is only half the battle. How do you feed it? Ogilvy dives deep into the actual mechanics of the creative process, making a bold claim that pure logic and reason actually block imagination.
That's a controversial take for some.
Very. He argues that the vast majority of traditional businessmen are entirely incapable of original thinking because they are hopelessly trapped in the tyranny of reason.
And this circles back perfectly to Dr. Barron's psychometric finding about the vital necessity of accessing the unconscious mind.
Ogilvy admits that he is almost entirely incapable of sustained logical thought. Instead, he has meticulously developed techniques for keeping the telephone line open to his unconscious mind.
How does he do that?
He actively engineers downtime. He listens to massive amounts of classical music. He takes incredibly long hot baths. He goes bird watching. He gardens. He even takes extreme measures, going into silent retreat among the Amish communities in Pennsylvania, or taking long, solitary walks in the country.
He unplugs completely.
Yes, he forces himself to take frequent vacations where his brain is allowed to completely lie fallow day. No golf, no exhausting cocktail parties, no intense concentration, just riding a bicycle through the French countryside.
And what happens when the conscious, logical brain is finally quieted down?
He says that while he is employed in the act of doing absolutely nothing, he receives a constant stream of what he calls telegrams from his unconscious. And these sudden flashes of insight, delivered while watching a bird or soaking in a tub, become the raw material for his most brilliant, highest converting advertisements.
This is a catastrophic blind spot for modern management.
It really is.
I mean, we have built open plan offices and loaded them with Slack, Teams, and endless Zoom calls, ensuring that the conscious mind is constantly redlining on stress and logical problem solving. We demand immediate responses.
We never turn off.
Never! But you cannot squeeze paradigm-shifting ideas out of an exhausted, logically tyrannical brain. You have to engineer silence. Downtime is not a luxury. It is a critical, non-negotiable component of the creative supply chain. You must give the unconscious mind the silence it needs to draft those telegrams.
So let's pull all of these incredibly vivid, disparate ideas together. What we've seen through this deep dive into the world of 1930s Parisian kitchens and 1960s Madison Avenue is that building and managing a truly great creative organization requires an incredibly delicate, paradoxical dual nature.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is. On one side, the organization must be led by a formidable, undeniable master of the craft, a leader who can enforce the ruthless discipline, the immaculate cleanliness, the absolute punctuality, and the terrifyingly high standards of M. Petard.
The good butcher.
Exactly. A leader who will fire the pantry chef to protect the client and demand the broken windows are fixed immediately.
But the paradox is that this exact same leader must simultaneously construct a completely different psychological environment.
Yes, on the other side of the coin, that same leader must act as the stabilizing father figure, creating a safe, affectionate, deeply human space where eccentric, highly sensitive, high-strung mavericks can let their unconscious minds play without fear of being crushed by corporate bureaucracy or petty sibling rivalry.
It is the ultimate balancing act of leadership. And it is vital to remember that we are not talking about producing art for art's sake here. The goal is commercial dominance.
We're here to make money.
Right. Ogilvy notes that many of the greatest, most sublime creations in human history were explicitly inspired by the brutal desire to make money. He points out that the legendary composer George Frederick Handel was entirely bankrupt when he shut himself up in a room for 21 days and emerged with the complete, immortal score of the Messiah.
And he made a fortune.
And in doing so, he hit the absolute financial jackpot. Or consider the brilliant composer Sergei Rachmaninoff. When an earnest fan asked him what sublime, heavenly thoughts were passing through his mind as he stared out at the audience while playing his incredibly moving concerto, Rachmaninoff replied simply, "I was counting the house."
Counting the house, assessing the ticket sales while delivering absolute genius. It's a beautifully cynical, honest reality.
The ultimate insight here is that harsh commercial reality and true creative genius are not enemies. They are symbiotic.
They need each other.
They do. When they are managed correctly using the tension and the principles we've discussed today, they actually fuel one another. The brutal discipline of the market sharpens the creative mind, and the untamed creative mind conquers the market.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over as you look at your own workplace, your own team, or even the trajectory of your own career. Think deeply about the structures and the culture you have built.
Look closely at it.
Are you spending all your time polishing the snaffle and the curb on your team, enforcing HR guidelines, optimizing JIRA tickets, demanding polite, conventional, frictionless behavior, while completely forgetting to actually breed the bloody horse? Is your desperate desire for a quiet, predictable, perfectly organized office secretly suffocating the messy, eccentric, volatile brilliance that actually drives breakthrough success?
It is the most uncomfortable question a manager can ask themselves, but answering it honestly is the only path to extraordinary output.
And now that we know how to run the kitchen, how to enforce the standards, and how to manage the volatile genius of the chefs, the next logical question is, who exactly is going to eat the food? Next time, we'll explore the thrilling, nerve-wracking, high-stakes sport of hunting down the people who actually pay the bills as we dive into the secrets of how to get clients. So, what if the secret to landing the biggest clients in the world isn't about, begging for their business, but actually having the sheer audacity to point out exactly what their current partners are doing wrong?
I mean, it sounds like professional suicide when you phrase it that way, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because we are so deeply conditioned to treat sales, especially when you're the little guy pitching a giant, as this completely subservient, almost apologetic process. You walk in, you try to please the prospect at all costs, and you just hope they throw you a bone.
Right. You're just hoping for a crumb.
Exactly. But if you look at the actual mechanics of high-level persuasion, playing the eager servant is, well, it's often the fastest way to get dismissed entirely.
Well, today's deep dive takes you through Chapter 2 of David Ogilvy's advertising playbook, How to Get Clients. And you're about to learn how an unknown agency built a reputation from literal scratch.
Absolute zero.
Yeah, from zero. We're looking at the psychology of winning trust and why saying no to the wrong business is actually the ultimate growth strategy.
Yeah.
It's really a masterclass in positioning that matters for anyone interested in business, sales, or just entrepreneurship in general.
And we aren't just looking at theoretical corporate strategy here. We're looking at a historical blueprint.
Yeah.
We're talking about a strategy that took a completely unknown entity and engineered a massive empire out of thin air. So we really need to look at how this was done step by step, starting from the very first day this business basically opened its doors.
Yeah, let's set the scene because the context makes the strategy so much wilder, I think. The year is 1948, and we are looking at a man who was, just a few years prior to this, an obscure tobacco farmer in Pennsylvania.
Right, which is just crazy to think about.
It is. And he decides to hang out his shingle on Madison Avenue.
Right.
He has 0 clients. He has no massive portfolio to fall back on, just a tiny underpaid staff. And yet, on his very first day in the office, he issues this incredibly bold internal memo to his team, his order of the day.
Yeah, that order of the day is, well, it's a perfect encapsulation of his entire philosophy on building value because he didn't sugarcoat their reality at all.
Not even a little bit.
No, he explicitly stated in the memo that the agency was struggling for its very life and that they would be overworked and underpaid. But then, he immediately pivots to the standard he demands.
He said he was looking for young Turks, right?
Exactly, young Turks.
Yeah.
He had absolutely no use for toadies or hacks or yes men. He wanted gentlemen with brains. And then he just sets this massive stake in the ground. He declared they were going to make it a great agency before 1960.
The sheer audacity of setting that deadline is fascinating.
Oh.
But what he does the very next day is what really gets me.
Oh, yeah.
He sits down at his desk with this tiny, completely unknown agency behind him, and he makes a list of the 5 clients he wants the most. And he doesn't pick, local businesses.
No, he doesn't go for the low-hanging fruit.
Right. He doesn't pick mid-market regional players at all. He picks General Foods, Bristol-Myers, Campbell's Soup Company, Lover Brothers, and Shell.
The absolute titans.
These are the biggest, most entrenched blue-chip corporations on the planet at that time. From the outside, just looks like an act of mad presumption, like he's delusional.
It definitely looks like arrogance. But when you dig into the psychology of it, it was a highly calculated understanding of corporate vulnerabilities. He was leveraging what he called the pre-adipose advantage.
Okay, so pre-adipose literally translates to pre-fat, right? Like before getting fat.
Exactly, pre-fat. It's this biological metaphor that he applied to corporate structures. If we look at the historical precedent, Massive corporate giants didn't always want massive, complacent agencies as partners.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's actually a long history of corporate behemoths actively seeking out hungry, daring, dark horse agencies. Ogilvy understood that massive agencies, the ones currently holding those blue chip accounts, they inevitably become bloated.
They get too comfortable.
Right, they get slow. The pre-adipose phase refers to that lean, hungry, work close period of a business's life cycle, right before it gets rich, comfortable, and tired.
So he takes this biological metaphor and he basically turns it into a weapon in the pitch room.
Yeah.
He develops this set-piece monologue about the life cycle of an agency to deliberately unsettle these massive prospective clients.
Oh, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, he would walk in and describe how a great new agency is born, ambitious, full of dynamite, stealing accounts from the soft, older agencies. But then he'd say, as the years pass, the founders get rich.
They get tired.
Exactly. Their creative fires go out and they become what he called extinct volcanoes. And I guess the momentum of their past success might carry them for a while, but eventually dry rot sets in.
And this is where the knife really twists in the pitch. He would point out that when that dry rot sets in, these legacy agencies start relying on collateral services.
Yeah.
Like massive research departments, bloated account management teams, basically using all this extra fluff to hide their fundamental creative bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And at that stage, they become incredibly vulnerable to the new ruthless upstarts.
See, I understand the theory, but I really have to push back here for a second.
Sure.
Put yourself in the shoes of the executives sitting across the table. Think about this like a sports dynasty. You have a team that has won 3 championships in a row. They have the billion-dollar stadium, the star players, the massive payroll, the history.
Right.
Isn't it wildly presumptuous, maybe even offensive for a rookie who just walked onto the field to look a seasoned executive in the eye and tell them their current championship team is actually in the dry rot phase?
Mhm.
I mean, why wouldn't the executive just laugh him right out of the room?
Oh, it is presumptuous. Ogilvy himself later admitted it was a, quote, villainous stratagem.
A villainous strategy.
Yeah. He even said that 14 years later, when his own agency had become massive and adipose, he was horrified by his early behavior because he was now the exact extinct volcano he used to attack.
That is hilarious.
It is. But to your sports analogy, why does it actually work in the room? It works because the seasoned executive secretly knows the dynasty is aging.
Oh, the executive is already feeling the friction.
Precisely. They are the ones dealing with the bloated payroll every day. They're the ones frustrated that the star players are getting slow, that it takes, 3 weeks just to get a meeting, that the creative output feels uninspired.
They're already annoyed by the bureaucracy.
Exactly. The executive is sitting there wondering, wait, is he describing my current agency? Ogilvy didn't invent their dissatisfaction. He just gave voice to their silent fear. When your bank account is empty, you don't play the game of the giants. You change the rules to make your small size your biggest weapon.
And there is actual historical proof that this corporate appetite for the hungry upstart exists. Look at the famous story of the Camel cigarette account.
Oh, this is a great example.
You have this mammoth legacy agency pitching R.J. Reynolds, the client. And the agency proudly promises to assign 30 copywriters to the account to ensure its success. They're literally selling their massive bulk.
Yeah, throwing bodies at the problem.
Right. But the head of R.J. Reynolds just looks at them and replies, how about one good one? And he takes this massive, lucrative account and gives it to a young, relatively unknown copywriter named Bill Esty.
Because 30 mediocre minds do not aggregate into one brilliant mind. The client recognized that they needed potency, not bulk.
Exactly.
John Orr Young, one of the founders of the legendary agency Young and Rubicam, he used to advise manufacturers that if they were ever lucky enough to find young men with daring and energy who were actively building a reputation, they should immediately harness that energy for their own brand.
Capture lightning in a bottle.
Right. The underlying mechanism here is about reframing your perceived weakness. If you are just starting out, your lack of bureaucratic bloat is exactly what makes you dangerous, agile, and incredibly valuable. You have to sell the hunger.
Okay, so you sell the hunger,
Mm-hmm.
you frame your small size as an agile pre-adipose advantage. But here is the massive missing link for me.
What's that?
Having the audacity to call a giant an extinct volcano in a boardroom is great. But how do you get these corporate giants to even let you into the boardroom in the first place?
Yeah.
How does a literal nobody with no clients get the executives at General Foods to even pick up the phone.
Well, you don't wait for the phone to ring. You have to manufacture your own reputation.
Manufacture it.
Yeah. Ogilvy realized very early on that he was competing with roughly 3,000 other agencies in the United States at that time. If he played by the normal rules of waiting to be noticed, he would just starve.
Right.
His first imperative was to escape from obscurity so that he would end up on a prospect's mental shopping list long before he ever made an official pitch. He executed this highly deliberate, four-pronged visibility blitz.
Yeah, let's pull apart this blitz because it operates on an entirely different level than just standard, networking.
Huh?
Step 1. He targeted the media.
Yeah.
He invited 10 reporters from the advertising trade press to a luncheon. And he didn't pitch them a specific ad. He basically pitched them his own insane ambition. He told them he was going to build a major agency from scratch and target the biggest clients in the world.
Now, why do you think he targeted the trade press specifically rather than trying to get into, say, the New York Times right away?
Oh, because the trade press is read obsessively by the exact executives he wants to reach. It's the echo chamber of that specific industry.
Exactly. It's hyper-targeted. And the strategy worked beautifully. Those reporters loved the audacity of the narrative. They essentially became his allies.
Well, they probably loved having an underdog story to write about.
Totally. They started giving him insider tips on which accounts might be looking for a new agency. But more importantly, they printed every single press release he sent them, no matter how trivial.
Wow.
Yeah, one of his competitors famously joked that nobody went to the bathroom at Ogilvy's agency without it appearing in the trade press. He engineered a constant, inescapable drumbeat of visibility.
That is brilliant. And step 2 of the blitz is where we see his understanding of authority, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He followed a piece of advice to make no more than 2 speeches a year, but to ensure that every single speech was calculated to provoke the greatest possible stir.
Quality over quantity, but extremely loud quality.
Right. So for his very first speech, he lectures the art directors club. He doesn't just share ideas, he hands out a mimeographed list of 39 specific rules for making good layouts.
Let's dissect the psychology of that for a second. Why rules?
Well, because rules imply a fixed law of the universe that you have mastered and everyone else is violating rule.
Precisely. By issuing rules, you instantly position yourself as the ultimate authority. You are no longer a student or a peer, you are the professor.
You're grading their homework.
Yes. He wasn't asking the industry for permission to be considered an expert. He was dictating the very terms of expertise. Those 39 rules were so definitive that they were passed around Madison Avenue for years. When you create a framework, everyone else starts evaluating their own work against your standard.
And he doubled down on this provocation, too. He publicly suggested the creation of a college of advertising that would issue formal licenses to practice in the industry.
Yeah, that's such a wild move.
He even offered $10,000 of his own money to help start it. That is an intentionally inflammatory idea.
Yeah.
It implies that the current practitioners are just unlicensed amateurs. Of course, it hit the front pages of the trade press. It basically made him the de facto visionary that the press would call for a quote on any major industry issue.
Which feeds perfectly into the third prong of his blitz. Strategic networking on the periphery. He didn't just smash his head against the wall trying to meet CEOs directly.
Right.
He actively befriended the people whose daily jobs brought them into intimate contact with major advertisers. We're talking about the market researchers, the public relations consultants, the space salesmen who sold media placements.
He targeted the ecosystem around the target.
Exactly. Those people thought Ogilvy was networking with them because he was a source of future business for them. But what they actually received, over lunches and drinks, was a relentless, persuasive pitch on the merits of his new agency.
Smart.
He essentially turned the entire supply chain of the advertising industry into his own personal sales force.
He was planting seeds everywhere. And that leads to the fourth step, which feels almost overwhelming to me: relentless direct mail. He sent frequent, detailed progress reports to 600 people in every walk of life. But these weren't quick little postcards saying, hire us. He sent out massive, dense, heavily intellectual documents.
Which goes against literally all conventional wisdom, right? Conventional wisdom says executives are busy, so you have to keep it to 3 bullet points.
Right. Keep it short, keep it punchy. But look at the result. When he finally solicited part of the Seagram liquor account, Sam Bronkman, the legendary head of the company, literally quoted back to Ogilvy the last 2 paragraphs of a 16-page speech Ogilvy had mailed to him months prior. And he won the account.
Because dense intellectual content signals substance. If you only send 3 bullet points, you look like a vendor. If you send a 16-page thesis on the future of consumer behavior, you look like a peer.
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
This entire 4-pronged blitz is not standard public relations. It is calculated, aggressive authority building. The mechanism here is that you must deliberately engineer your own visibility. You speak your mind, you share your expertise loudly, and you use intentional provocation to force the market to react to you.
You have to force the issue.
Yeah, you ensure you are dominating their radar long before you ever sit down to ask for their money.
Okay, so let's pivot to the room itself. Because you've executed the blitz. You've made all this noise in the press. You've handed out the 39 rules. You've mailed the 16-page speeches. You finally get the meeting. You are sitting across the mahogany table from the CEO of a massive corporation. You would assume the strategy now is to talk louder, right? To dominate the room, to run through a massive slide deck, to prove your genius in person.
Right, that's what everyone does.
But the playbook suggests the exact opposite.
Yeah, once you cross the threshold into the room, the dynamic flips completely. Rigid, dominant salesmanship fails at this level. The most powerful stratagem you can deploy in a pitch is getting the prospect to do the talking. The more you listen, the wiser the prospect believed you are.
This brings up the incredible story about Alexander Konov, who is known as the Zipper King. Konov was an elderly Russian immigrant who had made an absolute fortune manufacturing zippers.
Quite the character.
Ogilvy goes to visit him, and Konov starts by showing him the factory in Newark, pointing out that they are currently manufacturing 6-foot zippers for Remains bags.
A rather grim, vivid detail that sets a very specific tone, wouldn't you say?
It really does. And then they get into Konov's chauffeur-driven Cadillac. Ogilvy notices that Konov is holding a copy of The New Republic, which was a left-leaning magazine, very atypical for massive corporate clients to be carrying around. Konov, who turns out to be a proud socialist millionaire, starts talking about how he knew Lenin and Trotsky intimately during their time in exile.
Now, imagine a typical desperate salesman in that Cadillac. They would be terrified of this tangent.
Oh, panicking.
They would try to awkwardly pivot the conversation back to zipper demographics or market share. What does Ogilvy do?
He simply listens. He doesn't interrupt with a pitch about his agency's capabilities. He just listens to this wealthy, powerful man talk about his past, his core beliefs, his life story. And because he listened, he won the account.
Why did that work, though? It works because at the highest levels of corporate power, these executives are incredibly isolated. Everyone who talks to them wants something. Everyone is pitching them.
There's a dollar sign to most people.
Exactly. When someone actually stops and listens to them as a human being, it is profoundly disarming. Listening validates their ego in a way that a slick sales pitch never, ever could.
That makes the Ampex story even more hilarious, honestly, because it takes this concept of silence to an absolute extreme. The advertising manager of Ampex comes to see Ogilvy to scout for a new agency. Ogilvy later admits that, for once in his life, he had lunched entirely too well. He had consumed so much alcohol that he was literally too potted to speak.
He had completely lost the physical power of speech due to a multi-martini lunch.
Yes. So the prospect walks in, and Ogilvy just motions him to a seat and looks at him questioningly. The prospect starts talking, and he talks for an hour without any interruption from Ogilvy.
Amazing.
The client is deeply impressed by Ogilvy's apparent thoughtfulness. Finally, the client asks, "Have you ever heard an Ampex record player?" Ogilvy, unable to speak, just shakes his head. The client asks how his home is decorated. "Modern." Ogilvy shakes his head. "Early American." Shakes his head. "18th century." Ogilvy nods pensively but holds his tongue.
And the result of all this nodding and shaking?
A week later, a magnificent Ampex record player arrives at his home, and they award him the account.
It's absurd, but the underlying psychology is entirely sound. The client mistook alcohol-induced silence for the profound, contemplative silence of a genius.
Right.
When you don't fill the air with your own anxious chatter, the prospect projects their own ideal version of you onto that blank slate. They assume your silence means you are carefully processing their brilliance.
It's the ultimate power move, even if it was completely accidental in that specific case. And this ties into another incredibly counterintuitive psychological tactic he used during the pitch, actively revealing what he called the chinks in our armor.
This is crucial.
Instead of pretending his agency was a flawless machine that could do everything perfectly, he would deliberately highlight their weaknesses early in the meeting. He would openly admit that they had no public relations department whatsoever, or he would tell them flat out that they completely refused to produce television spectaculars because he believed they cost too much for the audience they delivered.
Let's expand on this because it is the antithesis of modern pitching. Why would you walk into a multi-million-dollar pitch and immediately list the things you cannot do?
Because it instantly disarms the prospect's defense mechanisms. Think about it like walking into a high-end antique shop.
Right. Follow that thread.
You walk into the shop, and you see this beautiful mahogany dining table. The dealer walks up to you, but instead of telling you how perfect it is, he immediately runs his hand under the edge and says, I want you to know before you look any closer, there is a deep scratch hidden on the underside here, and this back leg was repaired about 50 years ago.
And what happens in your brain the moment he says that?
Your guard completely drops. Because he volunteered the negative information against his own apparent self-interest, he instantly wins your absolute confidence. So when he stands up and tells you that the rest of the piece is flawless, that the grain is original, and that it dates back exactly to 1820, you believe every single word he says.
Because he has mathematically proven his honesty. If he had walked up and claimed the table was 100% flawless, your brain would immediately start hunting for the scam. You'd be inspecting every joint looking for the lie. In a boardroom, the executives are expecting you to lie to them. They expect the slick, bulletproof facade.
They're waiting for the catch.
Exactly. By revealing the chinks in your armor, you validate your own honesty. You frame yourself not as a vendor trying to trick them, but as a trusted advisor who is confident enough to admit where their limits lie.
Okay, so silence and vulnerability build trust in the room. You've listened, you've admitted you don't have a PR department, but trust alone doesn't prove you can actually execute the work. If you're a young, unknown agency, isn't there a massive, almost gravitational temptation to just slide a free, completely finished ad campaign across the desk to prove your worth?
Oh, that is the eternal trap of the service industry, the speculative pitch. In the early days, when an agency has zero credentials and no reputation to lean on, getting those first major clients to take a leap of faith is incredibly difficult. Ogilvy found that at that nascent stage, it often paid to speculate. He would conduct pilot surveys on a prospective client's business at his own expense.
Because very few manufacturers can resist the narcissism of seeing free data about their own company.
Exactly. It's a brilliant wedge. But he took it further with Helena Rubinstein. She was a notoriously difficult, demanding client. She had changed advertising agencies 17 times in 25 years.
Oh.
At the time Ogilvy targeted her, her account was actually being handled by an agency owned by her own son.
Talk about an entrenched incumbent. You're pitching against her kid.
Right. So Ogilvy conducts speculative research, and he shows her data proving that her son's advertising is ineffectual.
But the data didn't win her over, did it?
No, data rarely wins hearts. What caught her attention were the speculative advertisements Ogilvy created based on that research. He didn't just bring spreadsheets, he brought creative execution. Specifically, he showed her photographs of his own wife, taken before and after a treatment in the Rubinstein salon.
And Madame Rubinstein, in a classic display of her brutal personality, looks at the before and after photos and says, I think your wife looked better before.
A savage response, truly, but despite the insult, it worked. The speculative work proved his skin in the game. It proved his deep investment in her brand, and they won the account. But, and this is a massive but, this strategy of doing free work is incredibly risky, and as the agency matured, he abandoned it entirely.
Yeah, we have to talk about why he abandoned it, because the Bromo Seltzer disaster perfectly illustrates the danger. They pitched the Bromo Seltzer account, and they decided to go all in on a speculative presentation. They built an entire campaign arguing that headaches are psychosomatic, and they spent $30,000 developing this pitch.
Which, in the mid-20th century, is a staggering amount of money for a growing business to just set on fire.
And they lost the pitch. They lost it to a competitor. That isn't just a bump in the road. That is the kind of financial devastation that can bankrupt a young company overnight.
Which is precisely why his mature policy evolved into an absolute refusal to engage in speculative campaigns. The economics of free work are toxic. You spend massive resources guessing at a client's problem without having access to their internal data or their real strategic vision.
You're flying blind, essentially.
Completely blind. Instead, his strategy shifted to showing prospects what the agency had already done for other manufacturers. He would bring them to the office, introduce the department heads, explain their operating policies, and reveal themselves exactly as they were, warts and all.
It's the shift from auditioning to consulting. If a prospect demands that you bankrupt yourself doing free work just to win a beauty contest, they are telling you exactly how they will treat you once you are hired. If they don't like the look of you based on your actual historical track record and the reality of your team, you are much better off walking away.
But that raises a really fascinating friction point. As the agency actually becomes successful, as the PR blitz works and the phone starts ringing off the hook, the entire dynamic of the business shifts. The hardest part is no longer desperately getting clients to talk to you. The existential threat becomes how to avoid taking on the wrong clients.
This is where the playbook completely flips my understanding of business growth. We're looking at a 10-point checklist, a literal gauntlet of criteria that Ogilvy developed to decide if a client was even worthy of his agency. And we really need to dissect these, because they aren't just arrogant flexes, they're deeply rooted in the brutal economic realities of running a service business.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the first few, which are about fundamental belief. Number 1, you must be proud to advertise the product.
He makes a brilliant distinction here. He noted that a lawyer has a professional obligation to defend a guilty man. A surgeon can successfully operate on a patient they personally despise.
Sure.
In those professions, detachment works, but professional detachment is fatal in advertising. You need personal commitment and enthusiasm to sell a product effectively. If you privately despise the product or think it's a scam, your lack of belief will bleed into the work and the campaign will fail.
And it damages the soul of your agency. Number 2 is closely related, but requires an incredible amount of ego check. You must believe you can do a conspicuously better job than the previous agency. He literally turned down the chance to pitch the New York Times because he looked at their current advertising and decided it was brilliant. He knew he couldn't improve upon it.
That is a stunning level of self-awareness. Most agencies would take the billing and just tweak the margins. But if you take an account where you can't move the needle, you will eventually be fired for lack of performance anyway, and your reputation will take the hit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Number 3, steer clear of dying products.
This is a trap so many ambitious service providers fall into. They think they can be the savior. But if a product's sales have been falling steadily for a long period, it almost always means the product itself is fundamentally flawed or the management team behind it is incompetent.
Right, you can't fix a broken core.
Ogilvy famously pointed out that no amount of brilliant advertising can cure bad management. If you take on a dying product, the product will die on your operating table and the market will blame the surgeon.
Okay, number 4 is where I really need to stop and debate this with you because it gets into the brutal math of it all. Criterion 4 is, the client must want the agency to make a profit. On the surface, that sounds nice. But practically, isn't it financial suicide for a growing business to sit there and turn down paying accounts just because the margins are a little tight? If someone walks in the door and wants to hand you a $10 million advertising budget, how do you justify saying no? Revenue's revenue, right?
That is the exact illusion that kills most agencies. You have to look at the surgical mindset he adopted, and you have to understand the actual terrifying economics of the agency model at that time. Ogilvy revealed that the average net profit made by an advertising agency after taxes and expenses was less than half of 1%.
Wait, hold on. A 0.5% net margin.
Yes, 0.5%. It is a razor-thin, terrifying knife edge to balance on. You are constantly poised between two catastrophic outcomes. Over-servicing a client to keep them happy and going bankrupt, or under-servicing them to save your margins and getting fired.
So if you have a massive account, but the client demands endless creative revisions, requires constant hand-holding, calls you at midnight, and refuses to pay for additional research.
That 0.5% margin vanishes in a single week. You are no longer making money. You are literally paying for the privilege of working for them. You are subsidizing their business with your payroll.
Wow, when you put it like that.
One toxic, unprofitable account doesn't just hurt the bottom line, it drains the lifeblood out of your staff. It kills agency morale. Saying no isn't about arrogance. It is the ultimate necessary defense of your company's survival.
That economic reality makes his 5th criterion absolutely fascinating. Criterion 5. If the account is unprofitable, it must offer a chance to create remarkable reputation-building advertising.
It's the calculated loss leader strategy. He openly admitted that they never made much profit on the Guinness account or the Rolls-Royce account. The math just didn't work. But those iconic accounts gave them golden, unrestricted opportunities to demonstrate their absolute creative peak.
They were portfolio pieces.
Exactly. The ads they wrote for Rolls-Royce put the agency on the global map. You take the financial hit because the prestige buys you 5 other highly profitable accounts.
Number 6 shifts to the human element, personal chemistry. He argued that the relationship between a client and an agency is as intimate as the relationship between a patient and a doctor. You have to live happily with them. He explicitly engineered his prospect list to avoid bullies, tyrants, and psychotics. If he found out a prospect had a history of firing agencies every 2 years, or if the CEO clearly needed a psychiatrist more than an ad agency, he walked away.
Because a toxic client destroys your best talent, your top creatives will just quit rather than endure a psychotic CEO.
Number 7. Advertising must be the breath of life for the client, not a marginal factor.
This is a brilliant strategic filter. If a company views advertising as just a fringe activity, something nice to have, they will immediately raid the advertising budget the moment they need cash for a new factory or to appease shareholders.
They'll just cut it without thinking.
Right. Ogilvy preferred to work with products of low unit cost, universal use, and frequent purchase. Think about soap, coffee, or razor blades. For those companies, advertising is the absolute core of their survival. They can't stop advertising, which means your agency becomes a permanent, essential partner, not a discretionary expense.
Number 8 is another risk mitigation strategy. Avoid untested laboratory stage products. Unless they are heavily backed and bundled with an established product line, new products are a massive gamble. 8 out of 10 new products die in test markets. And going back to your math, with a 0.5% margin, the agency simply cannot afford to shoulder the risk of launching a product that is statistically destined to fail.
Which brings us to number 9. And this one might be the most illustrative of all the criteria because it highlights the ultimate enemy of great work. Avoid associations.
Oh, the rayon manufacturer story. This is my absolute favorite anecdote in the entire text because it perfectly encapsulates the nightmare of corporate bureaucracy. Set the scene for us. Ogilvy is invited to pitch the Rayon Manufacturers Association.
Right, so he walks into this massive, pompous committee room. The chairman of the association looks down at him and tells him he has exactly 15 minutes to plead his case, and then they will ring a literal bell, and the next agency will be ushered in. It's a cattle call.
So Ogilvy, before even starting his pitch, stands there and asks 3 very specific questions to diagnose the reality of the account. First, he asks, how many end uses for rayon must be covered in this campaign? The chairman answers, tires, furnishing fabrics, industrial products, women's clothing, and men's clothing. 5 massive, distinct industries.
Then he asks his second question, how much money is available to accomplish this massive task? The answer, $600,000, which even back then spread across 5 industries is a microscopic budget.
And then the final, fatal question, he asks, how many people must approve the advertisements? The answer, the 12 members of the committee, representing 12 different manufacturers, each with their own competing agendas.
12 masters for one tiny budget. And how does Ogilvy respond to this setup?
He looks in the chairman and says, ring the bell, and he just turns around and walks straight out of the room.
I love that. It is the ultimate rejection of design by committee. It perfectly illustrates the danger of taking on an account with too many masters. You have 12 different corporate agendas, a completely inadequate budget, and absolute zero chance of ever doing great work.
It's doomed from the start.
Totally. The bureaucracy would stifle any creative spark, the endless revisions would obliterate that 0.5% margin, and the agency would take the blame when the campaign inevitably failed. Walking out was the only rational business decision.
And that leads to the final criterion, number 10, which is about internal corruption. Never take a client who forces you to hire a specific politician or executive to manage their business. He warned that agencies that play that game end up with a crew of internal politicians who ignore the creative team, blackmail the management, and poison the culture from the inside.
If you look at all 10 of these criteria together, they form an incredibly empowering philosophy. In a service business, defining who you will not work for is the most powerful way to define your brand identity. Your no protects your culture, it protects your razor-thin margins, and it protects your sanity.
Okay, so you filter out the nightmares, you've avoided the dying products, the psychotics, the associations, and the extortionists. You finally have a client who passes all 10 criteria. They are the perfect prospect. Now, how do you actually close the deal? When you are in that room making the final presentation, how do you behave?
This is where we see his philosophy on leadership in the pitch room. Many agencies, especially as they grow, make the catastrophic mistake of sending what Ogilvy called a show of bodies. They send a massive delegation to the pitch account managers, strategists, junior creatives, media planners. The head of the agency just stands up, says hello, and then introduces a series of subordinates who take turns haranguing the prospect with different parts of a slide deck.
It looks exactly like a corporate committee meeting.
And clients hate committee meetings. Ogilvy vastly preferred a solo performance. His logic was airtight. The final choice of an agency is almost always made by the head of the client company, the CEO, or the chairman. Therefore, the head of the agency should be the one doing the talking. Chairman should speak to chairman. It projects immense confidence and clarity of vision.
As he noted, one orchestra looks pretty much like every other orchestra, but you never confuse one conductor with another. When he pitched the massive Sears Roebuck account, he walked into their boardroom and faced their entire board of directors entirely by himself. No massive team, no safety net, just the conductor.
It's a high-wire act, but that profound confidence allows you to do things that would seem completely crazy to anyone operating from a place of fear.
Oh.
Which brings us to the Greyhound bus pitch. This is the ultimate master-level example of playing from a position of absolute strength.
The Greyhound story is incredible.
Oh.
Ogilvy was actually in a joint solicitation for the massive Greyhound account with another agency, Grey Advertising, which was led by a man named Arthur Fatt.
The structural setup for the pitch was that Ogilvy's agency was supposed to focus on upgrading the image of bus travel, while Grey was supposed to focus on the hard, local sales tactics. They were meant to present a united front.
Right. So they fly out to San Francisco for the final presentation. The night before, Ogilvy goes to Arthur Fatt's hotel room and asks to look at Grey's half of the presentation. He's looking through their research and their creative, and he sees the core slogan they came up with. It's such a comfort to take the bus and leave the driving to us.
Leave the driving to us. It is a brilliant, perfect, immortal slogan. It solves the exact psychological friction of taking a bus.
It is flawless. So Ogilvy sees this, and he immediately picks up the house phone, calls the Greyhound advertising manager, and invites him up to the hotel room right then and there. When the manager arrives, Ogilvy points to the work and says, "Arthur Fatt has just shown me his half of our joint presentation. It is the best I have ever seen. I advise you to give your whole account to Grey. To make your decision easier, I am now returning to New York." And he literally packs his bags and walks out.
He gave away a massive account on the eve of the pitch. It is a stunning display of professional objectivity. He recognized a winning idea. He recognized that the client would be better served by a unified campaign under that single brilliant slogan, and he refused to compromise the client's success just to grab his piece of the billing.
But isn't that just losing? How does walking away actually help his agency?
Because the industry is small and reputation is everything. By walking away, he cemented his reputation as a man of absolute integrity who puts the work above his own ego. The word of that level of honesty spreads through executive suites faster than any press release ever could.
That makes total sense.
The underlying lesson here is that you must never operate from fear. Ogilvy said he never wanted to get an account so big that he couldn't afford to lose it, because the day you do that, you commit yourself to living with fear.
And a frightened agency loses the courage to give candid, honest advice. Once you are afraid of losing the account, you stop being a trusted advisor and you become a lackey. You start telling them what they want to hear instead of what they actually need to know.
Exactly. You have to treat business development almost as a sport. You play to win, absolutely, and you play hard. But you have to do it with what he called light-hearted gusto. If you play it grimly, if you grip the steering wheel too tightly, the prospect smells the desperation.
No, they definitely sense it.
They sense that you need them, and the power dynamic instantly shifts against you. Plus, as he noted, if you live in that constant state of fear, you'll just die of ulcers anyway.
So let's pull the camera back for a second. When we look at this entire journey we've covered, from that audacious first day listing the 5 biggest clients in the world, to engineering a strategic PR blitz that positioned him as an authority, to sitting silently in a room with the Ampex executive to project genius, to having the sheer confidence to tell the Rayon committee to ring the bell and walk out, what is the central shift in mindset here? It clearly isn't about begging for a transaction.
No, the entire philosophy is about a radical paradigm shift in positioning. It is about demanding to be treated as a peer and a trusted advisor, rather than a subservient vendor. It is about having the profound, unshakable confidence to look a massive corporate prospect in the eye and say, I have the expertise to solve your problem, but I will only do it if we play by rules that respect the reality of my business and the integrity of my work.
You aren't asking for scraps from their table. You are a specialist offering a cure, but you are only offering it to patients who are willing to follow their prescription and respect the doctor. It's a complete inversion of how most people think about sales.
And that inversion is what built an empire. But of course, getting the client is only the first half of the battle.
Right.
Once you've successfully navigated the pitch, walked through the gauntlet of criteria, and landed these brilliant, demanding clients, a new clock starts ticking. How do you stop them from leaving when the inevitable 7-year itch strikes and they start looking at other hungry agencies? That dynamic of retention is exactly what we will uncover in our next deep dive.
It's a circle of corporate life, really. You build the dynasty, and then you have to fight off the new young Turks who are calling you an extinct volcano. We'll explore exactly how to defend that position next time.
Imagine, for just a second, landing your absolute dream client, like the kind of account that completely changes the trajectory of your whole career.
Right. The whale.
Exactly, the whale. You bring them on board, you build out this massive, dedicated team to support their every need, you are practically printing money, and then out of nowhere, you just lose the entire account.
It's a total nightmare scenario.
It really is. And the kicker, it's not because you did bad work.
No, usually it's not.
Right. It's because a single crucial message got garbled in this massive corporate game of telephone. Or, I mean, perhaps even worse, imagine getting fired specifically because you agreed to do exactly what the client asked you to do.
Even though you knew deep down it was a fundamentally terrible idea.
Yes, which is just wild to think about.
It feels like a paradox, doesn't it? Like the idea that you could be penalized or even lose your livelihood for simply saying yes to the person writing the checks.
It goes against everything we're taught about customer service.
Exactly. But in the high-stakes world of client services, and frankly in any business relationship where you are providing expertise, it is a brutal common reality. I mean, the landscape of keeping clients is entirely different from the landscape of winning them.
Which is crazy because we are, as a business culture, completely obsessed with acquisition. Like, everyone wants to know how to close the deal.
Oh, absolutely. The thrill of the hunt.
Right. But there is this terrifying statistic out there in the advertising and agency world, this phenomenon called the 7-year itch.
Yes. The data on that is actually pretty sobering.
It is. It's the data-backed reality that the average client fires their agency every 7 years. And that's just the average. I mean, many don't even last that long.
They really don't.
So whether you are listening to this deep dive as the head of a massive firm with hundreds of employees, or, you're a solo freelance designer, or even a SaaS consultant working from your kitchen table, understanding the secret to long-term client retention is quite literally a matter of survival.
It's the foundation of everything. And to build that survival guide today, we are looking back at a literal masterclass in the subject. We are going to be exploring Chapter 3, which is titled How to Keep Clients, from David Ogilvy's foundational writings on the advertising industry.
Such a classic.
It really is. But Ogilvy wasn't just a theorist. He built one of the most successful agencies in the world by completely mastering the psychology of the client-agency dynamic.
And what you, the listener, are about to learn today is that keeping a client isn't about the superficial stuff.
Not at all.
It's not about buying them expensive steak dinners, and it is certainly not about obsequious pandering or blindly agreeing with every whim they have.
Right, the customer is always right. Myth.
Exactly. True retention is about radical candor. It is about relentless, almost exhausting preparation. And perhaps most surprisingly, it is about setting incredibly firm, non-negotiable boundaries.
Which is hard for a lot of people to swallow.
It is. So I want to start right at the bedrock of this, the stakes, because Ogilvy does not sugarcoat this at all. He paints a picture of losing an account that is, frankly, apocalyptic.
He really does. He actually describes the experience of losing a major client as pure hell.
Pure hell.
Yeah. And to understand his methodology, we kind of have to understand the mechanics of why that loss is so devastating. Like, we aren't just talking about a dip in quarterly revenue.
Right. It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. In the service industry model, when a massive account leaves, it triggers a chain reaction that can act like a run on a bank.
Okay, wait. I want to pause on that phrase, a run on the bank. Because when we think of a financial panic, we think of everyone rushing to withdraw their money because, well, confidence is shattered. How does that map onto a creative agency or a consulting firm?
It maps perfectly onto the psychology of the firm's ecosystem. So when a cornerstone client walks out the door, the revenue vanishes instantly, right?
The money stops flowing.
But the massive payroll obligations, the salaries of the dozens or hundreds of people you hired just to service that account, those remain. And there is no physical inventory to sell off to cover it.
Oh, wow. So you're just bleeding cash.
Instantly.
Yeah.
The agency might have to fire 50 or 100 people literally overnight. And when the rest of the staff sees that bloodletting, the confidence of the entire firm
That
collapses.
makes total sense. Everyone starts panicking.
Exactly. The best talent starts looking for the exits immediately because they fear they are next. It's a structural and psychological implosion.
That extreme insecurity is, I mean, it's fascinating. That feeling of building a house on a fault line. Ogilvy actually points out that this constant looming threat of extinction is the very reason why advertising and high-end consulting pay such notoriously high salaries.
Yes, it's essentially a risk premium.
Right.
He argues that next to the theater, advertising is probably the least secure career path a person can choose. You're perpetually traveling on the edge of a precipice.
So the high pay is just hazard pay, basically.
That's exactly it. Hazard pay for the psychological toll. He even warns that if you are a naturally insecure or easily frightened person, you are in for a very rough passage in this industry.
Okay, so if the stakes are truly that high, if losing one key client can cause an extinction-level event for your business, how on earth do you prevent it? I mean, what is the absolute first line of defense against that kind of catastrophe?
Well, the first line of defense is an operational rule that Ogilvy enforced with an iron fist, and it's one that goes against almost every modern business instinct. He explicitly forbade his account executives from hunting for new clients.
Wait, what? I have to push back on that immediately because that sounds like commercial suicide today.
It does sound crazy, yeah.
I mean, we live in an era of hustle culture. Every single person in a company is expected to be a brand ambassador, always networking, always closing. Telling your frontline managers they aren't allowed to drum up new business sounds insane.
On the surface, absolutely.
Huh.
But his reasoning is deeply rooted in human nature. He believed that the thrill of the hunt fundamentally corrupts people.
Corrupts them how?
He actually compares the pursuit of new business to playing the horses.
Like gambling.
Yes, it's an addiction. Winning a new account gives you this heady, intoxicating rush of dopamine. It feels like pure, unadulterated growth. But if your account executives are constantly looking over the fence for the next big win, the shiny new prospect, they inevitably, even subconsciously, start neglecting the clients they already have.
The ones actually paying the bills right now.
Exactly. And that neglect is the catalyst. That is what starts the revolving door spinning. The current client feels the shift in attention. They feel taken for granted, and that 7-year itch begins to set in much, much earlier.
It's the classic leaky bucket problem. I mean, I see this all the time with modern SaaS companies and freelance agencies alike.
Oh, very rare.
There is absolutely no point in pouring new water into the top of the bucket like spending massive amounts of energy and capital chasing new leads if you haven't plugged the gaping holes at the bottom.
You're just wasting resources.
Exactly. The water just drains out, and you exhaust yourself trying to keep the water level steady. You have to dedicate your absolute best brains, your highest mental energy to the clients already in the bucket. But if the math on that is so clear, why do we still get so distracted by the hunt?
Because the hunt is glamorous,
Right.
right? And retention is often invisible labor.
Yeah.
Retention is maintenance.
Yeah, maintenance is never sexy.
Exactly. It requires a completely different, almost unglamorous kind of focus. It requires ensuring that you are deeply, fundamentally wired into the actual decision-making nervous system of your client's organization.
Which is way harder than it sounds.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Primarily because of the corporate structure itself, which brings us to the immense danger of corporate layers.
Ah, yes, the thick insulation of middle management. Because even if I follow the rule, like, even if I stop hunting for new business and dedicate 100% of my time to my current client, if I'm only talking to the wrong person over there, I am still building on sand.
That is the trap. Ogilvy issues this severe warning against relying on a single point of contact or allowing your relationship to get buried under bureaucratic sediment.
Bureaucratic sediment, I love that phrase.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Big corporations, by their very nature, insulate their top decision makers. The presidents, the chairmen, the CEOs, they are heavily protected by layers upon layers of hierarchy.
Right, you've got assistant brand managers reporting to brand managers who report to division heads who report to vice presidents.
Exactly. And every time an idea moves up a run on that ladder, it loses fidelity.
So if I pitch a brilliant, nuanced, highly strategic campaign idea to a junior manager, what actually makes it to the CEO's desk?
Usually a mutated, unrecognizable version of your original idea.
Oh man, that hurts just thinking about it.
To illustrate the mechanics of this degradation, Ogilvy uses a brilliant analogy from the trenches of World War I.
Okay, lay it on me.
So he describes a brigade major sending a vital verbal message back from the front line through the chain of command. The original message is urgent and clear. It's send up reinforcements, we are going to advance.
Yeah, it does not get more
That's
direct than that.
But then it gets passed mouth to mouth, from the trench to the runner, from the runner to the lieutenant, from the lieutenant to the captain, all the way back to headquarters. And by the time that message reaches the brass, it has morphed entirely into send up 3 and 4 pence, we are going to a dance.
No way. That is a phenomenal image. It's hilarious, but if that's your multi-million-dollar marketing strategy or your carefully coded software architecture, it is absolutely terrifying.
It's the trench telephone effect.
The trench telephone. I love that. And the underlying mechanism of that trench telephone isn't just innocent mishearing, right? Like it's cognitive bias and self-preservation.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
When a middle manager passes your idea up the chain, they often strip out the bold, risky elements that made the idea great in the first place.
Because they don't want to stick their own neck out.
Exactly. They sanitize your work. They want it to be safe.
Yeah.
And when the sanitized, boring version gets rejected by the CEO, guess who gets the blame?
The agency, obviously.
Always.
Plus, those corporate layers are constantly shifting. Like, people get promoted, fired, poached. Ogilvy talks about the phenomenon of the new broom, like the new executive who comes in from the outside and wants to sweep clean.
Yes, the dreaded new broom.
They want to fire the old vendors and bring in their own people to prove they are making an impact. So if your only champion at the company gets replaced by a new broom, you are suddenly standing on a trapdoor. You have to constantly resell your value.
Which is exactly why the solution is to build multi-level ties.
Right.
You cannot rely on a single thread. You have to weave a highly complex web.
Right.
You have to wire your business into the client's business at every single possible level of the hierarchy. The president of your firm needs a direct line to their president. Your media buyers need to be having lunch with their marketing team.
Your data researchers need to be swapping white papers with their researchers.
Yes, total integration.
If I think about this in human terms, it's remarkably similar to marrying into a family.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, if you get married, you can't just have a great relationship with your spouse and completely ignore everyone else at the Thanksgiving table.
It won't end well for you.
No. If you want the marriage to last long term, you have to win over the in-laws. You need to build a rapport with the siblings. You need to understand the weird family dynamics and the eccentric uncles.
Very true.
Because if you only have one connection, your spouse, and that single connection gets strained, you have no other support system in that family to advocate for you. The whole thing collapses.
That is a highly accurate parallel. And to facilitate that kind of deep integration, Ogilvy had a very specific structural strategy. He believed in bringing the backroom boys out into the light.
Meaning the people who actually do the work, not just the polished salespeople.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Traditionally, agencies would only send their most charming, charismatic account executives to client meetings, the smooth talkers.
Right, the Mad Men types.
Exactly. But Ogilvy flipped that. He would bring the statisticians, the media planners, and the actual copywriters straight into the boardroom.
Really? Even if they weren't good at presenting.
Especially then. He makes this wonderful observation that sometimes a brilliantly talented copywriter might be a bit of a tongue-tied hobbledehoy-like, socially awkward, terrible at making small talk, perhaps completely unpolished in a presentation setting.
Tongue-tied hobbledehoy is an amazing phrase.
It is. But his point is, if the client has the perception to see the raw genius in that person's work, it cements the relationship on a much deeper foundational level.
Because it's authentic.
Yes. It proves to the client that your team has absolute depth rather than just a shiny veneer of salesmanship.
I see the power in that. It builds a gritty, real trust. But let me push back on the new broom scenario for a second. Let's say you've done all this. You've brought the backroom boys in. You have deep ties across the organization. But a new CEO comes in, and they are openly skeptical of you. How do you resell yourself to an executive who already has one foot out the door without sounding incredibly defensive or desperate?
The psychological trick there is to treat them exactly as if they were a brand new prospect who has never ever heard of you.
Oh, interesting.
You don't walk in and demand respect based on your past victories with their predecessor. That just breeds resentment.
Because it threatens their ego.
Exactly. Instead, you bring your absolute A-game, you present your capabilities completely from scratch, and you show them proactively how you are going to solve the specific problems that they care about today.
So you earn their respect for your future potential, rather than begging for loyalty based on past invoices.
Exactly right.
That requires leaving your ego completely at the door.
It does. It's not easy.
Okay, so let's assume you navigate all of that perfectly. You are wired in at every level, your communication bypasses the trench telephone, you've survived the new brooms. Even in that utopian scenario, eventually, a campaign is going to fatigue.
Naturally.
A product launch is going to miss the mark. The market shifts. And that reality necessitates what Ogilvy calls the icebox policy, which completely blew my mind when I read it.
The icebox policy is one of the most relentless, proactive strategies for client retention ever devised.
It's intense.
Very intense. The core premise is this. The very moment a client approves a new campaign, the second they say yes and you pop the champagne, the agency must immediately begin working on another entirely different campaign.
I want to make sure I understand the timeline here. Before the first campaign even launches into the world, before you have any data on whether it actually works.
Immediately. While the ink is still wet on the approval signature, you develop a robust second campaign, you put it into test markets, and you keep it quietly on ice.
Why the intense urgency, though? Like, why not just launch the first one, monitor the analytics, and then pivot if you need to?
Because you are managing human psychology, not just data.
Okay.
Think about what happens if that first campaign flops in the real world. Or, even more commonly, what happens if the top management at the client simply decides subjectively that they hate it after staring at it for a month.
Panic sets in.
Exactly. The client feels exposed and vulnerable. They start questioning your competence. But if you have utilized the icebox policy, you preempt that panic entirely.
Right.
You walk into the room and say, we understand this isn't working as expected. That's totally fine. We already have a fully tested secondary campaign ready to deploy tomorrow.
Wow. You essentially become bulletproof.
You have a shot in your locker ready to go at all times. It allows you to pivot instantly without losing any momentum. And more importantly, it provides the client with an immense sense of psychological security.
They feel safe with you.
They feel completely protected, which prolongs the agency's tenure indefinitely.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, especially for anyone listening who runs a smaller operation. Like, doesn't this icebox policy absolutely decimate your profit margins?
It's a fair question.
You are effectively doing double the creative work, double the strategy for the exact same retainer fee. And doesn't it exhaust the creative team to constantly build things that might literally never see the light of day? It just sounds like a fast track to burnout.
Your critique is entirely valid, and Ogilvy does not shy away from that reality at all. He freely admits that the icebox policy cuts deeply into agency profits.
He does.
Oh, yeah. He acknowledges that it deeply exasperates the copywriters and designers who feel like they are running on an endless treadmill, producing ghost work. But he frames it as the ultimate insurance premium for long-term survival.
So it's a calculated sacrifice.
Exactly. You have to anchor this back to the extreme stakes we discussed at the very beginning. The pure hell of losing a massive account and having to fire 100 people.
With bank run.
Right. When you weigh the exhaustion of your creative team and a dip in short-term profit against the existential threat of the entire firm collapsing, the icebox policy is clearly the lesser evil. You can never, ever afford to rest on your laurels. You must operate with the paranoia that you need a plan B fully baked while plan A is running.
And if we map that onto today's landscape, even a solo freelance web designer can use a micro version of this.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't have to build a whole second website. But if you present a bold, risky new UI design to a client, you should probably have a safer, more traditional wireframe already sketched out and in your back pocket.
That's brilliant.
So if they panic at the bold design, you don't have to go back to the drawing board for 2 weeks while they lose faith in you. You just pull the backup out of the icebox.
That is a perfect modern application of the principle. It's all about maintaining momentum and authority in the face of client anxiety.
I love that. Okay, so you are operating at this incredibly high level. You are furiously working on all these backup plans. You have multiple major clients. Your agency or your consulting firm is just buzzing with activity.
Sounds great so far.
But here's where it gets highly precarious. Because you have all this proprietary information flowing through your office, and you have to be meticulously careful not to cross the streams. Which brings us to the strict mandate of the absolute separation of church and state, or what the text somewhat cheekily refers to as client polygamy.
Successful polygamy is the term he uses, yes. And it refers to a non-negotiable rule against mixing your clients together.
Which happens a lot, right?
It is a very common, very seductive trap for young, eager executives or account managers. They look at their roster of clients, they see overlapping demographics, and they see synergies.
Right.
They think, client A makes hot dogs, client B makes mustard. Let's do a massive joint promotion and save everyone money.
I mean, it sounds incredibly logical on paper. Let's combine our marketing budgets, leverage both audiences, and create a win-win. Why does Ogilvy say that is a terrible idea?
Because human nature and corporate ego will always, always override logical synergies.
Really? Always?
Pretty much. Ogilvy warns that these joint operations almost inevitably end in disaster and bruised egos. Why? Because it is mathematically impossible to make things perfectly equal.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Inevitably, one client will feel that they got the short end of the stick. Client A will feel that Client B's logo was slightly larger on the billboard, or that Client B benefited more from the shared television spot.
And then they complain to the agency.
Exactly. And when the agency tries to step in and umpire these petty disputes between two massive egos, the agency ends up with a bloody nose from both sides.
It is a classic no-win scenario. You are literally inviting conflict into your own house.
So you must maintain total discretion and absolute boundaries. To illustrate how far he took this, Ogilvy shares a remarkable anecdote about two of his most famous, iconic accounts at the time.
Which ones?
Hathaway shirts, famous for the man with the eye patch, and Schweppes tonic water.
Oh, wow. Huge brands.
Massive, culturally defining campaigns handled simultaneously by the exact same agency. Yet, the only time the heads of those two accounts ever met was entirely by coincidence.
Wait, how did that happen?
They both happened to walk into the same dealership in New York to buy a Rolls-Royce on the exact same morning.
No way. That is incredible. The agency was managing these massive parallel universes, and they never once threw a dinner party to introduce them. They kept them in absolute airtight silos.
Complete silos. The concept of successful polygamy means you have to project an aura to each client that they are the absolute only pebble on your beach. You are solely devoted to them.
Right.
If you are in a meeting with client A and they casually ask you how a campaign for client B is performing, you must immediately change the subject. You give them absolutely nothing.
I feel like that would be so awkward in the moment. Like if a client you genuinely asks an innocent question about another brand and you just stonewall them, doesn't that make you look evasive?
It might irritate them for a fraction of a second,
Yeah.
but it builds profound long-term trust. Think about the underlying psychology here.
Okay.
If you gladly spill the confidential metrics or the strategic secrets of client A to client B over lunch, client B is going to smile and nod.
Yeah.
But internally, they're going to immediately realize, if this agency is so willing to spill someone else's secrets to me, they are definitely spilling my secrets to everyone else.
Oh, man. That is so true. It is exactly like a therapist.
Yes.
If we unpack that analogy, imagine you go to a new therapist and during your session, they start casually dropping identifying details about their other patients' breakthroughs or traumas. Even if they think they are just providing a helpful example, you would instantly freeze up.
You'd be horrified.
You would lose all trust in that room. You would immediately think, who were they talking to about me when I leave? The absolute boundary is the only thing that creates the safety required for the relationship to work.
That is a very profound connection, and it hits at the core of the dynamic. Absolute boundaries preserve absolute trust.
Wow.
And building that unbreakable level of trust is the only thing that allows you to survive the inevitable bumps of the 7-year itch. But getting to that level of trust requires something that is deeply unnatural and incredibly difficult for most people in client services.
Which is?
It requires extreme honesty, even when that honesty is deeply professionally uncomfortable.
Yes. Which brings us to the power and the very real peril of radical candor. Because Ogilvy wasn't just talking about keeping your clients' secrets from each other. He was talking about telling the hard, brutal truths directly to the people paying your invoices.
Right. To keep a client for a decade or more, you must transition from being a vendor to being a true partner.
A partner.
Ogilvy even went so far as to suggest buying shares in the client's company so that you truly think and suffer like them. You have to mentally move your chair to their side of the table.
I love that image.
And the cornerstone of that partnership is telling them the hard truths that their own employees are simply too scared to tell them.
What does that actually look like in the trenches, though?
Well, it means aggressively admitting your own agency's mistakes before you are caught. It means looking the client in the eye and telling them when their core product is flawed or when their staff is incompetent.
Wait, hold on. Telling the client their product is bad, that sounds like a one-way ticket to getting fired. If I hire you to market my software and you tell me my software is garbage, I'm going to find someone else who believes in it.
And you might.
Yeah.
Ogilvy is very transparent that this is a dangerous game, and he shares a story where exactly that happened.
Let's hear it.
He was working with a client that produced spaghetti, and after deeply analyzing it, he told the client directly that he had serious doubts about the consistency and quality of their spaghetti.
He went after the spaghetti. And how did the client react to that radical candor?
The client fired the agency on the spot.
Of course they did.
They questioned how the agency could possibly do a good job advertising a product they personally disliked and criticized.
Okay, so if telling the truth about the spaghetti literally lost him the account, why in the world is candor still the golden rule? I mean, why wouldn't you just smile, say the spaghetti's delicious, take the retainer, and run the ads?
Because operating without candor is a ticking time bomb that will eventually destroy your reputation anyway. Yes, he lost the spaghetti account in the short term, but he saved his agency's soul and long-term credibility.
Right, because if the product is bad, the ads won't save it.
Exactly. If you market a terrible product with a smile, the campaign will eventually fail when consumers reject it. And when it fails, the client won't blame their spaghetti, they will blame your advertising.
Ah, I see. You get the blame anyway.
Always. Ogilvy unpacks how modern clients, the smart ones anyway, increasingly welcome candor, especially when it is backed by objective consumer research. Furthermore, by preemptively admitting your own agency's mistakes, you strip the power away from corporate buck passers.
The buck passers, the middle managers we talked about earlier who are just looking for a scapegoat when sales drop for the quarter.
Exactly. If the agency makes a mistake on a media buy and you try to hide it, a middle manager will eventually find it and use it as a weapon to destroy you.
Look, the agency messed up. Fire them, not me.
Precisely. But if you walk into the CEO's office and say, "We made a tactical error last week, here's exactly what it cost, and here's how we are fixing it at our own expense," you own the narrative.
They can't weaponize a failure that you have already claimed and corrected.
You take all the air out of the balloon.
That is so smart. But for that to work, you have to build up a massive reservoir of goodwill. Like, you can't just be the bearer of bad news all the time.
Correct. Which is why you have to make a point of seeing clients in calm weather, not just in crises.
Calm weather.
If you only ever pick up the phone to talk to the CEO when the server's down or the campaign is on fire, your voice becomes entirely associated with stress and panic.
You become the Grim Reaper.
Yes. If you build a foundation of candor and connection during the good times, when sales are up and everyone is happy, they will trust your motives when you eventually have to deliver bad news.
That makes total sense. But what about the other example you mentioned, denouncing the client's staff? Criticizing a product is one thing, but telling a CEO that their VP of marketing is incompetent seems infinitely more dangerous than insulting the spaghetti.
It is extremely dangerous, and Ogilvy notes that it should be exceptionally rare. He only felt compelled to do it twice in 15 years.
Only twice.
Yes. Once with an executive who was genuinely acting in a psychotic manner, and once with a manager who was a pathological liar. You do not do it lightly.
Right, not just because you find them annoying.
Exactly. You don't do it over minor disagreements. But if a client staff member is actively, maliciously destroying the work or the integrity of the campaign, a true partner has a fiduciary duty to speak up. If you stay silent while a bad actor tanks the project, you are basically complicit in the failure.
Okay, let's explore the absolute extreme edge of this. You are radically candid. You tell them the truth about the product. You build the relationship. But what if candor completely fails?
It happens.
What if you look the client in the eye and say, the strategy is terrible, the research shows it will fail and it will damage your brand, and the client looks right back at you and says, I don't care, I am paying you. Execute the strategy anyway. You are faced with the ultimate business dilemma. Do you take the money or do you take a stand?
This is where we arrive at perhaps the most surprising and challenging lesson in the entire text. It's what we can call the Munich Rule. And the lesson is this. Sometimes, the absolute best way to manage your overall client roster and protect your firm is to resign accounts.
Resign them.
You must fire your client.
Firing the people who pay you, that is a massive, terrifying paradigm shift for anyone in a service industry. Most of us are conditioned to endure almost anything to keep the revenue flowing.
We really are.
Under what specific conditions do you actually pull that trigger?
Ogilvy outlines 3 non-negotiable red lines. First, you must resign if the client is an abusive tyrant who destroys the mental health of your staff.
Absolutely.
Second, you must resign if the account is a perpetual financial loss, meaning you are spending more hours servicing them than you are getting paid for, and they flat out refuse to renegotiate the economics.
Okay, that's just basic math.
And third, and most crucially for our discussion, you must resign if the client forces you into a grand strategy that you know for an absolute fact will fail.
Because if you execute a doomed strategy, even if it was explicitly their idea and they signed off on it, the market failure ruins your reputation as the expert.
Precisely. The market doesn't know the client forced your hand. The market just sees bad work with your agency's fingerprints all over it. To illustrate the catastrophic cost of caving in, Ogilvy details the infamous Rinso disaster.
Okay, let's dive deep into this Rinso story because it sounds like a perfect storm of bad decisions.
It was a total disaster born of appeasement. The agency was working for Lever Brothers, which was a massive, incredibly powerful client, a true whale.
Right.
The head of the company, a man named Jerry Babb, forced the agency into a marketing corner. He mandated that they advertise an old, obsolescent soap powder and a brand new, technologically advanced detergent in the exact same advertisement.
Wait, any first-year marketing student knows that is a cardinal sin. You do not cannibalize your shiny new product by attaching it to the dying old product in the same breath. It confuses the consumer completely.
It's marketing suicide. But the mandate got worse. Babb didn't just dictate the strategy, he dictated the tone. He instructed Ogilvy to inject a specific note of whimsical gaiety into the campaign.
Whimsical gaiety.
Yes. And the result, in Ogilvy's own pained words, was dreadful doggerel.
Dreadful doggerel. What does that even mean? Like, terrible rhyming nonsensical fluff.
Exactly. Think of bouncy, ridiculous poetry trying to sell soap. It was a confusing, silly, embarrassing campaign that violated every single principle of effective advertising Ogilvy had ever established.
But the agency went along with it. Like, they knew it was terrible, but they executed it anyway.
They capitulated. The client was too big, the revenue was too important, and they just caved. And the aftermath was severe and multi-layered. First, the agency lost immense face in the industry.
Because everyone saw the ad.
Right. The internal staff thought management had gone mad for approving such garbage. The morale plummeted. But the long-term damage was even worse. They actually couldn't recruit serious top-tier marketing talent for years afterward.
Because potential hires were looking at the portfolio?
Exactly. A brilliant young copywriter would look at that Rinso work and say, I don't want to work for an agency that produces dreadful doggerel. You guys don't know what you're doing. Or worse, you have no spine.
Oh, that makes so much sense. If I'm a top-tier software engineer today, I'm not going to work for the company that shipped the worst app of the year.
Exactly. By appeasing one big client, they poisoned their own talent pool. And the ultimate painful irony of the whole story.
Don't tell me.
6 months after the agency compromised its integrity and ruined its reputation to appease Lever Brothers fired the agency anyway.
Oh, man. That is brutal. They sold their soul, they tanked their reputation, they alienated future talent, and they still lost the account.
Which is why Ogilvy famously states in the test, 1 Munich was enough.
1 Munich was enough. Let's unpack the weight of that phrase. Because he is making a very specific, heavy historical reference to the Munich Agreement of 1938.
Yes.
That was when European powers tried to appease Hitler by giving him the Sudetenland, hoping it would satisfy him and prevent a war. It was the ultimate policy of appeasing a tyrant, and it catastrophically failed. Hitler just took more, and World War II happened anyway. Ogilvy is literally equating appeasing a bad client strategy with historical appeasement.
He is highlighting the fundamental psychological truth of appeasement. It never works.
Yeah.
It never satisfies the unreasonable party. It just delays the disaster and makes you weaker when the disaster finally hits.
Wow.
The core lesson here is that you must never appease clients on matters of grand strategy or ethics. It is always, always better to fire a client and take the short-term financial hit than to destroy your own reputation, hollow out your team's morale, and hamstring your future ability to recruit talent.
He also gives another example that isn't about bad strategy, but just bad math, right?
Yeah.
The Reed and Barton flatware account.
Yes, and this is a great counterpoint because Reed and Barton were tyrants. Ogilvy actually really liked the client. They were friendly, the product was good,
Okay.
but the agency was losing money every month servicing the account because the workload exceeded the retainer, and the client simply wouldn't adjust the compensation to make it profitable. So Ogilvy resigned a friendly, pleasant client purely because the economics didn't make sense. You have to be ruthless about the math, even if you like the people.
Okay, I have to jump in here and speak for the listeners who might be grinding it out right now, because it is very easy for a giant, wealthy agency on Madison Avenue with a dozen other multi-million-dollar accounts padding their bank account to walk away on principle.
Sure.
But let's ground this in reality. How does a hungry freelancer or a small sauce startup founder who's struggling to make payroll next Friday find the courage to fire a paying client? When that check is the literal difference between keeping the lights on and closing up shop forever, how do you exercise the Munich rule?
It is arguably the hardest thing to do in business, and the pressure you were describing is immense. But the logic Ogilvy presents actually scales down perfectly. In fact, it's even more vital for the small player.
How so?
Think about it. If you are a freelancer or a boutique agency, your reputation and your portfolio are your only real assets. You don't have massive brand equity to fall back on.
That's true.
If you let a client bully you into producing dreadful doggerel, that terrible work is exactly what future clients will judge you on. You're cementing your own ceiling.
So by taking the bad money, you are actively preventing yourself from getting good money later.
Exactly. Furthermore, toxic, time-consuming clients drain your most precious resource, your bandwidth.
Yeah.
Every single hour you spend arguing with a tyrant or revising a doomed strategy is an hour you cannot spend hunting for a client who will actually respect your expertise and pay you what you are worth.
Wow.
The courage to fire them comes from a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
You have to realize that bad revenue is a toxic asset.
A toxic asset. I love that framing.
It looks like cash on the balance sheet, but it costs you more in stress and reputational damage and an opportunity cost than it actually pays in cash. When you realize that bad revenue is actively killing your business from the inside, firing the client becomes an act of pure self-preservation.
That is incredibly powerful. Bad revenue is a toxic asset. So to avoid getting into these unwinnable situations where you have to fire a client, you really have to take absolute, uncompromising control of the relationship from the very first day.
Which you do.
You have to control the narrative. And more specifically, you have to control exactly how you present your ideas. And that takes us to the final, highly tactical phase of retention, mastering the delivery room.
The delivery room is Ogilvy's evocative term for the presentation environment. It's the boardroom, the Zoom call, the pitch theater where campaigns are presented and million-dollar decisions are made.
The arena.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is not just a meeting. It is a high-stakes, highly theatrical, electric event. And the agency must control the variables of that event meticulously.
When you say meticulously, how granular are we talking? Are we just talking about having nice slides?
You are talking about managing the client's actual biology.
Biology.
Yes. Ogilvy shares a hilarious yet deeply painful anecdote about presenting a massive, critically important campaign to Sam Bronfman, the formidable head of Seagram.
Okay, what happened?
Ogilvy and his team worked for months on this pitch, but they made a catastrophic logistical mistake. They agreed to present the campaign immediately after lunch.
Oh no, the dreaded post-lunch food coma. I can feel the disaster brewing.
It was a physiological disaster.
Right.
Bronfman, digesting a heavy executive lunch, fell sound asleep in his chair right in the middle of the pitch.
You are kidding.
No. And when he finally jolted awake, he was in a poisonous, irritable mood, completely disoriented, and basically, to save face, he summarily rejected months of the agency's hard work.
Oh, that is heartbreaking.
The strategy was sound, the creative was brilliant, but it was destroyed entirely by the timing of the meeting.
So tactical rule number 1, know your client's biological quirks and never ever pitch in the post-lunch dip.
Exactly.
What else? How do you structure the actual personnel in the room?
Tactical rule number 2, avoid using committees to present.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Many agencies feel the need to justify their retainer by bringing a small army of people into the room, right? And they have everyone take a turn speaking for 3 minutes.
Yeah, the classic round-robin pitch.
Ogilvy argues this is a terrible mistake. It dilutes the power of the argument. One highly persuasive advocate who is deeply briefed on every detail and able to handle aggressive cross-examination is infinitely better than a disjointed committee passing the microphone around.
It makes complete sense if you think about cognitive flow. It's about establishing singular authority.
Yes.
Like if you have one master conductor, the orchestra makes sense and the audience is captivated. If 5 different people try to conduct different movements of the symphony, it just becomes noise and the client checks out.
And beyond the structure, You have to meticulously tailor the intellectual style of the presentation to the specific leader in the room. You cannot use a cookie-cutter deck.
Right.
Ogilvy contrasts the sleepy Sam Bronfman with another legendary client, Sir Frederick Hooper, the head of Schweppes.
The tonic water guy.
Right. Hooper was a highly educated, deeply sophisticated man. When Ogilvy walked into his office and presented a dense, numerical, statistical marketing plan, Hooper got incredibly bored.
He didn't want the numbers.
He didn't want pie charts at all.
Yeah.
He wanted literary criticism. He wanted to debate the art of the copy and the philosophy of the brand. He actually looked at Ogilvy and told him that his statistical approach was positively babyish.
Positively babyish. That is quite the aristocratic insult to take from a client.
It really is.
But it perfectly illustrates the point. You can't just read the data. You have to read the room. You have to deeply know the intellectual appetite of the person signing the check. If they want poetry, you give them poetry. If they want spreadsheets, you give them spreadsheets.
Absolutely. And when you are delivering those presentations, there are hyper-specific, almost psychological rules of engagement. For instance, Ogilvy's flip-over easel rule.
What's that?
He mandates that if you use visual text in a presentation like a flip chart back then, or a PowerPoint slide deck today, you must read the text aloud exactly word for word as it is written on the screen.
Wait, really? Let's pause on that, because that violates the golden rule of modern presentations. We are always taught not to read off our slides.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive.
We're told to paraphrase, to use the slide as a jumping off point so we don't sound like monotonous robots. Why on earth does Ogilvy say to read it verbatim?
Because Ogilvy understood cognitive load theory long before it was a buzzword, and the psychology entirely backs him up on this.
Really?
Yes. He argues that in a high-stakes pitch, you must assault the audience simultaneously through their eyes and their ears with a unified message.
Unpack the mechanism of that for me. Like, what is actually happening in the client's brain when we paraphrase?
Okay, so if you put a bullet point on a screen that says, market share will increase by 15% due to demographic shifts, the client's brain immediately starts reading those words.
Right, they can't help it.
If, at that exact same second, your mouth says, we're going to see a huge bump in sales because younger people love the product, you have just created a cognitive collision.
A collision.
The client is trying to process one set of data visually and a completely different set of data auditorily. The cognitive load splits, the brain gets confused, and as a defense mechanism, the client just becomes inattentive.
Synchronizing the visual and the audio reading, the exact words they're seeing, creates absolute piercing focus.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You aren't being a robot. You are intentionally aligning their sensory inputs so the message penetrates perfectly. Assault them simultaneously. I love that.
It's very effective.
And there's one more crucial point about the delivery room that ties this whole philosophy together. He makes a hard distinction about the role of the account executive. He says they cannot just be waiters.
Yes, the waiter style of account management is the death knell of client retention.
A waiter. Explain that.
A waiter is someone who simply shuttles ideas from the creative team to the client's table and then shuttles the client's feedback back to the kitchen without ever actually taking a stance, debating the merits, or adding strategic value. They're just a polite conduit taking orders.
It's like a messenger pigeon. Think about it. If you are just carrying a note tied to your leg and you don't actually deeply understand the strategy or the psychology behind the message you're carrying, you cannot possibly defend it when the client pushes back. Exactly right.
If the client looks at a design and says, I don't like this shade of blue, make it red, the waiter just smiles, pulls out a notepad and says, right away, I'll tell him to change it to red.
Which doesn't help anyone.
Right. But a true partner, an advocate, says, I hear you, but here is the specific psychological reason we chose that blue based on competitor analysis, and here is why changing it to red will actually hurt your conversion rate.
Yeah.
You have to be a fierce advocate for the work, not a waiter.
Exactly. Because an advocate commands respect. A waiter just takes orders. And if your entire relationship with a client is based on just taking their orders and executing them blindly, you are entirely expendable.
Because anyone can be a waiter.
Right. You are not a partner. You are a commodity. And commodities get price shopped and fired during the 7-year itch.
So if we take everything we've talked about today, if we step back from the World War I trenches, the spaghetti, the icebox, and the dreadful doggerel, and we synthesize all of these incredibly potent lessons from Chapter 3 of Ogilvy's Confessions, what is the singular defining insight here?
The ultimate lesson of how to keep clients is a complete, unapologetic rejection of the standard subservient service model. True, long-term professional retention is not about obsequious pandering. It is not about playing timid corporate politics. And it is certainly not about adhering to the old, flawed adage that the customer is always right.
Because if the customer was always right and they knew exactly what to do, they wouldn't need to hire an expert like you in the first place.
Precisely. True retention is about adopting a posture of deep, proactive, almost aggressive partnership. It's treating the client's business with the fierce protectiveness and strategic rigor you'd give your own company.
That's a high bar.
It is. That means building deep, multi-level roots across their organization so you aren't reliant on one fragile relationship. It means relentlessly preparing backup plans, utilizing the icebox policy so you are never caught flat-footed by failure. And above all, it means having the spine to tell them the unvarnished truth, to maintain absolute boundaries between accounts, and to have the moral and financial courage to walk away when they cross the line into bad strategy.
It is about choosing to be an indispensable expert rather than a disposable servant. It's hard work, but it's the only way to build something that truly lasts. So now you know the brutal, honest, fascinating truth about what it takes to keep your clients from firing you.
It's quite a journey.
It is. But what happens when we flip the mirror? Because for your own business to thrive, you probably hire outside help, to freelancers, agencies, consultants. In our next deep dive, we are going to explore the other side of the table, what it actually takes to be a good client, and how your own corporate behavior might be the very thing stopping your partners from giving you their best possible work. Until then, keep digging deeper.
So imagine a scenario that plays out in corporate boardrooms or, startup offices around the world, basically every single day.
Oh, I can already picture it.
Right. You have just authorized spending $10 million on this massive advertising campaign.
That is no small amount of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you've secured the budget, the product team delivered, your ambition is just through the roof.
Then reality hits.
Yeah, a few months later, you're forced to sit there and watch as your company gets completely outsold, outmaneuvered, and just outclassed by a competitor who spent, maybe $1 million.
Ouch. Yeah, that hurts.
It's brutal. And your immediate reaction, naturally, is to point the finger at the creative team. You blame the agency, the writers, the designers, maybe your own marketing director.
Of course. That's the easy way out.
You fire them, you hire a new team, and you start the whole cycle all over again. Well, according to one of the greatest minds in advertising history, before you fire anyone, you should probably, take a long, hard look in the mirror.
Yeah, that is a really bitter pill to swallow.
It really is. Because today, we are exploring a deeply provocative premise for this deep dive. And that premise is, clients ultimately get the advertising they deserve.
It's perhaps the most vital truth in the entire business of commercial creativity, honestly.
So what we're looking at today is Chapter 4 of David Ogilvy's seminal text, Confessions of an Advertising Man.
A classic.
Absolutely. And he lays out this definitive framework for how to actually be a good client.
Which is something a lot of people think they know how to do, but really don't.
Right. And the reason this matters so intensely for you listening right now is that mastering this framework is like the ultimate operational shortcut.
Oh, without a doubt.
It doesn't matter if you're a tech entrepreneur hiring your very first brand consultant, or a small business owner working with a local social media manager, or even a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company managing some massive global agency network.
The rules still apply.
They do. Understanding the psychology, the economics, and the boundaries of this relationship is how you extract world-class, needle-moving work from outside experts and actually drive business growth.
Yeah, and Ogilvy's perspective here is just incredibly valuable because he had a front row seat to spectacular corporate dysfunction.
I can only imagine the things he saw.
Oh, by the time he wrote this, he had worked intimately with nearly 100 different clients.
Wow.
Yeah, he had seen companies behave so appallingly with such ego and bureaucratic friction that no agency on earth, no matter how brilliant, could ever produce effective work for them.
So they were basically doomed from the start.
Exactly. But conversely, he had seen clients who behaved so exceptionally well that it practically guaranteed a successful campaign.
So he figured out the pattern.
He did.
Yeah.
He distilled these observations into a set of working principles that really trace the entire life cycle of a creative partnership.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning of that life cycle. Because before you can manage an outside team, you have to actually find them and hire them.
Right. You need to pick the right partner.
And the conventional wisdom on how to hire an agency is, according to Ogilvy anyway, completely broken.
It really is. It's fundamentally flawed.
So the standard move today, especially for large contracts, is to invite, say, 5 different firms into a room and demand they each present a fully realized speculative advertising campaign for free, just to win the business.
Yeah, the classic pitch process.
Right. But Ogilvy strongly advises against using these speculative free campaigns to pick your partner. Why is that?
Well, the amateur approach is to demand to see the final product before you commit. It feels like a smart, risk-mitigating business move, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. You get to see the goods before you buy.
Exactly. But there is a fatal structural flaw in this logic.
Okay, what is it?
The agencies that consistently win these elaborate pitch contests are the ones that dedicate their absolute best brains, their top-tier, high-priced talent, exclusively to the new business pitch.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. They build a stunning presentation. But the moment they actually win your account and the contract is signed,
They bait and switch.
basically, yeah, those brilliant minds move on to pitch the next prospective client. Your day-to-day business is quietly relegated to their second-best brains.
The junior staff.
Exactly. The people who actually have the capacity to do the daily grunt work.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go for it.
I'm spending millions of dollars of my company's money. Or maybe I'm a startup founder spending my last $50,000 of seed funding on a rebrand.
A very stressful situation.
Very.
Mhm.
I wouldn't hire an architect to build a custom house without seeing a blueprint first.
That's a fair point.
Right.
Yeah.
If I don't see what they're going to do for my specific product, isn't it incredibly irresponsible to just hand over the contract?
The instinct to want a blueprint totally makes sense.
Yeah.
But we have to look at how that blueprint is actually created in a vacuum.
What do you mean by in a vacuum?
Well, the speculative model is actually far riskier because it actively promotes superficiality.
Oh, because they don't really know the business yet.
Precisely. It encourages agencies to prioritize flashy wow factors and clever visual gimmicks that look fantastic in a sterile boardroom presentation rather than doing the deep, arduous strategic thinking that actually moves product off the shelves.
So they're just trying to dazzle you.
Right. An agency cannot possibly understand your business deeply enough to create a master campaign without first going through a rigorous, time-intensive discovery process.
Which they haven't done yet.
Exactly. And that process can only happen after they are hired and granted access to your internal data.
So it's less like hiring an architect who can look at an empty lot and draw a house, and maybe more like hiring a bespoke tailor.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like you wouldn't walk into a tailor shop and say, sew me a custom suit right now to prove you're good, and if it fits perfectly without you ever measuring me, then I'll buy it.
Exactly. That would be absurd.
The tailor has to measure you first. The real value is in the fitting.
That is a much more accurate parallel. The fitting is the discovery phase.
Okay, so if you aren't looking at a custom speculative pitch, how do you actually evaluate them?
You look at their historical track record. You look at what they have built for other bodies, to stick with your tailor analogy.
You check their past work.
Right. And most importantly, you pick up the phone and you call their current clients.
References.
Yes. Ogilvy suggests calling major, sophisticated advertisers who employ multiple agencies.
So people who really know what they're talking about.
Exactly, because they can give you objective cross-bearings on who is actually delivering measurable results, not just pretty pictures.
You are hiring a proven methodology and a capability then. Not a single isolated idea generated under the artificial pressure of a pitch.
Spot on.
He also tackles this enduring myth that you need to hire a massive, monolithic global agency to get premium service.
Oh, yeah, the big agency illusion.
Right. Is it really an illusion?
Largely, yes, especially when it comes to the day-to-day work. Whether you hire a gigantic holding company or a small independent boutique, the human math of the advertising business remains remarkably consistent.
What's that?
Ogilvy noted that you generally get about 9 staff members actively working on your account for every $1 million you spend.
Wait, really? Just 9 people?
Yeah, roughly. The overall size of the agency doesn't magically multiply the human hours dedicated to your specific brand.
So what actually matters then?
What matters infinitely more than the name on the door is the personal chemistry with those specific 9 people assigned to you.
The people actually doing the work.
Exactly. This is an intimate, high-stress relationship. If the personal chemistry is sour, if you don't actually respect or enjoy talking to the account lead or the creative director, the work will become absolute torture.
Okay, so you've checked the references, the chemistry is fantastic, you hire them based on their track record. Now comes the fitting, the discovery phase.
The most critical part.
Right. Ogilvy says you must brief your agency thoroughly. And look, he doesn't mean sending them a 2-page PDF with your brand colors and a generic mission statement.
Oh, definitely not.
You have to literally hand over the vault keys. You must teach the agency your business inside and out.
This is where the heavy lifting on the client side truly begins. And sadly, where so many partnerships fail before they even start.
Because clients don't want to put in the time.
Exactly. The briefing phase is where the true value of the creative partnership is unlocked. The more the agency knows about the unvarnished reality of your product, your operational challenges, your market constraints, the sharper the final output will be.
But that takes a lot of effort.
A massive, unglamorous time investment from the client's executive team. Often managers are too busy, or perhaps they assume the agency should just magically get it, so they toss a superficial brief over the wall and expect a brilliant campaign to bounce back.
And what happens when they do that?
The agency is forced to fly blind. They spend weeks desperately trying to dig out the facts themselves, which burns through your budget, delays the timeline, and demoralizes the creative team.
The historical example Ogilvy gives here is just staggering when you think about the time commitment.
Oh, the General Foods story. It's incredible.
It really is. So when General Foods hired Ogilvy's agency to handle the advertising for Maxwell House Coffee, they didn't just walk in, hand over a bag of roasted beans and say, hey, make us look premium, write a catchy jingle.
No, they went so much deeper.
They literally sat the entire agency team down, day after day, and delivered comprehensive university-level lectures.
They taught them the incredibly arcane economics of the global coffee industry.
Right. They explained the volatile commodities market of green coffee sourcing. They went into the complex science of the blending and roasting process.
They even broke down their margin structures and the elasticity of their pricing.
They essentially gave the ad agency a masterclass in the operational reality of running General Foods.
And why did they do that? Because they recognized a fundamental truth. Advertising, at its most effective core, is the communication of compelling facts.
If the agency doesn't possess the facts,
Then they have nothing to work with except empty stylistic fluff.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
By investing that massive amount of time up front, General Foods ensured that every single piece of creative work, every headline, every image, was deeply grounded in the commercial reality of the product.
So the practical takeaway for any listener who is outsourcing creative or strategic work is this. Once you have hired the right partner, you must give them absolutely all the data.
Withhold nothing.
Right. If you hide your flaws, if you gloss over your supply chain issues, if you pretend your customer retention is better than it actually is, you are actively sabotaging your own investment.
You're just paying for someone to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
Exactly. Okay, so the agency now knows everything. They are fully briefed, they understand the economics of your business, and they are ready to build.
Time to get to work.
Now comes the daily reality of managing this relationship. How do you oversee highly creative, often deeply sensitive professionals without completely crushing their spirit?
It's a very delicate balance.
It really is. This requires looking at the working environment, specifically the balance of control, fear, and corporate hierarchy. And Ogilvy states this so bluntly. Emancipate your agency from fear.
This might be the most psychologically profound observation in his entire framework.
Why do you say that?
Because he notes that most agencies run scared almost all the time.
Really? All the time?
Yes. And this chronic anxiety stems from two distinct factors.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, the demographic of people who gravitate toward commercial creative work, writers, designers, art directors, they often possess a natural baseline of insecurity regarding their work.
Well, yeah, they are putting their ideas out there to be judged constantly. That's inherently vulnerable.
Exactly. But second, and far more destructively, many corporate clients make it a deliberate management tactic to constantly project the threat that they are looking for a new agency.
Ah. If you're listening to this and you manage a team, whether that's an external ad agency, a team of freelance coders, or even just internal employees, ask yourself, do you drop subtle hints that you might replace them just to, keep them on their toes?
It's such a pervasive old-school management fallacy that fear is an effective motivator.
Is it totally a fallacy, though? Some people say pressure makes diamonds.
It is a massive fallacy, and it completely misfires when applied to knowledge work and creativity. Let's look at the psychology of fear in a professional setting.
Okay, let's break it down.
Frightened people are biologically and neurologically powerless to produce great, daring, original work.
Because they're in fight or flight mode?
Yes. When people are afraid for their livelihoods or worried about their agency losing a massive account, their focus shifts entirely from what is the best, most innovative way to solve this consumer problem to what is the safest thing I can present that won't get me fired.
Yeah, oh, wow. So they just retreat to the conventional.
Exactly. They stop trying to do what is right for the product and start trying to do whatever will appease the specific anxieties of the client.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So therefore, Ogilvy argues, the relationship must have a foundational sense of permanency built into it from day one.
The agency needs to know you're committed to them so they can take the intellectual risks necessary to actually stand out in a crowded market.
The lengths to which some great clients go to protect that psychological safety is just amazing.
Yeah, the Ford story.
Yes. He tells the story about the Ford Motor Company. So, after Ogilvy resigned the Rolls-Royce account, he reached out to Ford, just to introduce himself. Just a casual, get-acquainted meeting between heavyweights.
Right, totally normal networking.
And the advertising manager for Ford flat out refused to even have lunch with him.
Just turned him down cold.
Cold. And his reasoning. He knew Detroit was a small, gossipy industry town.
Word travels fast.
Fast. If the head of a rival agency was seen visiting Ford headquarters, the news would inevitably leak. Ford's current agencies would hear about it, and those teams would instantly become alarmed and distracted by the fear of losing the account.
The Ford executive actively protected his current agencies from the psychological distraction of fear.
Imagine a tech CEO today, refusing to take a casual coffee with a competing web development shop, purely to protect the mental focus of their current developers. That is an incredibly high level of empathetic leadership.
It really demonstrates a deep understanding of the delicate psychological ecosystem required for creativity to flourish.
And protecting that ecosystem leads directly to another major rule, which is don't compete in the creative area.
Ah, yes. Ogilvy uses a wonderful archaic phrase here. Why keep a dog and bark yourself?
It's a great visual. I mean, if you hire an expert to do a job, you have to let them do the job.
Precisely. Backseat driving absolutely destroys the morale of creative talent.
So how do you define the boundaries then?
The division of labor must be crystal clear. The client's role is to define the strategy, to dictate what needs to be communicated based on their deep knowledge of the business schools.
And the agency's role?
The agency's role is to define the execution, to figure out how to communicate that strategy to the public in a compelling way.
Okay, I have to challenge this, though. Let's say I'm a marketing director. It is my company's money. It's my brand's reputation on the line.
Of course.
If the agency comes back with a campaign and the headline is slightly off, or the casting in the commercial feels wrong, or, the primary color on the landing page doesn't match our usual branding, shouldn't I step in and dictate those changes? Am I just supposed to sit on my hands while they execute poorly?
I get it. The instinct to intervene on the granular details is overpowering for most managers.
Especially if they have pressure from their own bosses.
Exactly. But when a client crosses that line and starts dictating the execution, rewriting the copy themselves, choosing the typography, they're essentially diluting the very specialized expertise they just paid a premium for.
You are turning highly paid experts into mere order takers.
That's exactly what happens. Furthermore, when you blur the line between strategy and execution, you almost always trigger the ultimate creativity killer.
Let me guess. The Corporate Approval Committee.
You guessed it.
This is where things get really painful. Ogilvy pleads with clients not to strain advertising through too many levels of hierarchy.
The committee review process is an absolute disaster for bold communication.
Why is it so bad?
Well, he warns against forcing an agency to clear campaigns through 4 or 5 different levels of corporate middle management, where every single level has the power to tamper, adjust, and veto.
Just writing notes on top of notes.
Right. When you subject creative work to this gauntlet, a few things happen. First, it wastes an incredible amount of time in endless revision cycles.
Which cost money.
Yes. But worst of all, it fundamentally changes the behavior of the creative team. It breeds what Ogilvy accurately terms creative politics.
Meaning they stop trying to sell the product to the public and start trying to sell the ad to the managers.
Exactly. The copywriters and art directors stop thinking about the psychology of the end consumer. Instead, they start thinking like politicians whipping votes.
That's such a toxic dynamic.
It is. They try to design an advertisement that is just inoffensive enough to collect a yes vote, from the VP of sales, the legal department, the brand manager, and the CEO.
They start pandering to the specific, often conflicting whims of a dozen different people.
And the result is never a sharp, piercing, effective piece of communication.
Think of it like trying to cook a single dish for a dinner party where one guest is vegan, one is on a strict carnivore diet, one has a severe peanut allergy, and one only eats raw food.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Right. If you try to accommodate every single restriction in one dish, you don't get a culinary masterpiece. You end up serving a glass of room temperature water.
That is a perfect analogy. Committees consistently water down strong ideas into dull compromises, or what Ogilvy calls wishy-washy neuters.
So how does the great work actually get made? If not by committee, what is the ideal structure?
Ogilvy points out that if you look at the history of commerce, the greatest, most iconic campaigns almost invariably come from a partnership of just two decisive people.
Just two.
Just two. One sure-footed creative lead on the agency side, working in tight harness with one inspiring, decisive executive on the client side.
Like who?
He cites his own legendary partnership with Ted Moscoso, which built the massive Puerto Rico economic development campaign, or the historical partnership between Gordon Seagrove and Jerry Lambert that practically invented the modern mouthwash industry with Listerine.
Wow.
Two people empowered to make decisions. Not a board, not a focus group of executives.
So the directive here is twofold. First, restrict your internal approval process to one or two decisive leaders who actually have the authority to say yes. Eliminate the bureaucratic gauntlet.
Yes.
Second, give your creative partners absolute autonomy over the execution. You emancipate them from the fear of losing the account, yet clearly define the strategic goal, and then you get completely out of their way.
That is the ideal state. However, giving your agency autonomy does not mean you abdicate your responsibility or blindly accept whatever they hand you.
Right. It's not a free pass.
Autonomy is only effective and only safe for your business if you pair it with incredibly high standards and radical honesty.
Which introduces a fascinating tension in client behavior.
It does.
This is where it requires real leadership. We've just established that you shouldn't tell them how to do their job, and you shouldn't backseat drive. But Ogilvy also insists that you must be relentlessly candid.
You cannot pussyfoot around.
If an ad is bad, you have to look them in the eye and say it's bad.
It seems like a contradiction to the emancipate them from fear rule, right? But it isn't.
How so?
Disastrous consequences arise when a client dances around the truth in their day-to-day dealings. If you think the strategic execution is subpar, you must speak your mind loud and clear.
But the nuance is in how you deliver that candor. You must be blunt without being threatening. So how do you practically do that? Like, how do I tell an art director, hey, this landing page design is terrible, without reintroducing that exact culture of fear and anxiety we just spent 10 minutes dismantling?
The psychological distinction lies in ruthlessly criticizing the work while continuously affirming the relationship.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, Ogilvy actually gives us the precise phrasing he recommends. When presented with subpar work, the ideal client looks at the team and says, "What you have just shown me is not up to your usual high standard. Please take another crack at it."
Oh, that's brilliant. Let's break down why that specific phrasing is so powerful. Your usual high standard.
By saying that, you are actively affirming that they are capable. You are validating your belief in their overarching talent and reminding them why you hired them in the first place.
But you are objectively rejecting this specific piece of output.
Yes. And crucially, you cannot just stop there. You must explain exactly why it fails strategically.
You can't just say, I don't like the vibe, try again.
No. You have to articulate the business failure. This copy doesn't address the primary pain point we discussed in the brief, or this imagery skews too young for our target demographic.
Because true professionals do not wilt under objective strategic criticism. They actually crave specific, actionable feedback.
They want to solve the puzzle.
You attack the problem, not the person. And that flows right into setting high standards. Ogilvy says to discourage safe bunting and demand home runs.
Absolutely.
But there is a very specific ego-driven trap he warns clients about when it comes to managing campaigns that are actually hitting those home runs. And this is something I see happening constantly today, especially in digital marketing where we are just obsessed with fresh content.
Oh, the fatigue factor.
Yes, he warns clients never to change a successful campaign just because they are tired of it.
This is an incredibly common, unforced error in corporate marketing.
Think about the life cycle of an advertisement from the client's perspective. The client reviews the initial pitches, they approve the storyboards, they sit in on the commercial shoots, they review rough edits.
They're living and breathing it.
Exactly. And then they see the final ads running constantly because they are actively monitoring their own brand. After 6 months of this, the marketing director and the CEO are bored to tears by the campaign.
It feels incredibly old and stale to them.
So they call the agency and say, we need something fresh, let's pivot, let's shoot a new concept.
But the consumer's experience is entirely different.
Vastly different.
The asymmetry of attention is massive here. The average consumer is bombarded with thousands of messages a day. They are not paying attention to your brand.
They might catch a fleeting glimpse of your ad once every few weeks.
Right. So while the CEO is sick and tired of the campaign, the broader public is just barely starting to recognize it. The repetition is just beginning to build neural pathways and brand association for the consumer.
So you pull the plug right when the medicine is finally starting to work, just because the doctor is bored of writing the prescription?
That's a great way to put it.
When should a client actually change a campaign then?
You only switch when a new campaign objectively tests better than the old one in the real world.
You let the data dictate the pivot.
Not your own boredom. If you have a highly effective campaign, you might run it for 5, 10, even 15 years.
Wow. But getting that history-making campaign in the first place requires a very specific type of human mind. And Ogilvy's advice on how to handle these minds is incredibly insightful regarding corporate culture. He tells clients they must learn to tolerate genius.
It is a profound sociological observation, honestly.
How so?
Ogilvy notes that truly exceptional creative minds, the rare individuals who can actually invent a concept that changes the entire financial trajectory of a company, are incredibly scarce.
Like finding a needle in a haystack.
Exactly. And almost without exception, these people are highly disagreeable.
Let's dig into the psychology of that. Why are the most creative people often so abrasive or difficult to manage within a traditional corporate structure?
Because true creativity requires nonconformity.
Right. You can't think outside the box if you're obsessed with following the rules.
Exactly. If you are the type of person who easily and comfortably conforms to social norms, corporate rules, and standard operating procedures, you are highly likely to conform to standard ways of thinking as well.
That makes sense.
The people who can look at a problem and see a completely bizarre, unorthodox, brilliant solution are usually unorthodox in their personal and professional lives.
They are mavericks.
They are eccentric, they can be abrasive, they don't respect hierarchy, and they certainly don't fit neatly into a rigid corporate org chart.
And because of that, the corporate immune system attacks them.
Precisely. Mediocre middle managers inherently resent these individuals.
Because they're hard to control.
Yeah. As Ogilvy points out, mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself. A manager who values order, compliance, and properly filled out timesheets above all else will feel deeply uncomfortable around a chaotic genius.
They see them as a threat.
And so the manager will often feel compelled to discipline, marginalize, or outright fire the exact nonconformists they desperately need in order to make their brand stand out in a saturated marketplace.
The client's job, then, is to recognize this dynamic and protect the genius.
Yeah.
You have to build a protective moat around your eccentric, high-performing creatives.
You tolerate the fact that they might be rude in a meeting or that they refuse to adhere to the dress code because they are the ones capable of laying the golden eggs.
It requires a highly evolved, secure management style to tolerate that friction.
It really does. But as we transition into the structural realities of this business, we have to acknowledge a hard truth.
What's that?
None of this culture, none of this psychological safety, none of this careful feedback matters at all if the underlying machinery isn't fueled properly.
We have to talk about the money.
We have to talk about the economics of the partnership.
Yes, the financial architecture. Because how you pay your external partners and how you fund your initiatives dictates the absolute ceiling of the quality you will receive.
Without a doubt.
Ogilvy outlines a few critical rules here, starting with one that sounds almost absurdly obvious but is routinely ignored by procurement departments. Ensure your agency makes a profit.
It sounds obvious, but it is a constant point of friction. Historically, and even today, agency profit margins are remarkably thin.
How thin are we talking?
Ogilvy cites an average profit at the time of just 34 cents on every $100 billed.
Wait, 34 cents? That's practically nothing.
That is a microscopic margin of error. If your specific account starts losing money for the agency, perhaps because your committee demands endless out-of-scope revisions, or you require your account team to fly across the country for pointless weekly status meetings, what is the rational business response from the agency's leadership?
Well, they are going to quietly shuffle their A-team off my account and replace them with junior staff, while the heavy hitters get moved to a client who actually lets the agency pay their rent.
Exactly. Your account will be starved of top talent, and you will never even be formally notified.
That's terrifying.
But Ogilvy goes much deeper into the structural economics of the industry. He famously championed the idea of the flat fee over the traditional 15% commission model that dominated advertising for decades.
Let's explain how that 15% commission structure actually worked, because I think a lot of people outside the historical ad world might not realize just how massive a conflict of interest it was.
It was a huge conflict. Under the traditional commission system, an agency did not charge the client an hourly rate or a project fee for their creative time.
So the creative work was basically free.
The creative work was essentially given away for free. Instead, the agency made its money by acting as a media broker.
Oh, how did that work?
They bought media space, say, a full-page ad in a national magazine, or a block of airtime on a television network on behalf of the client. The media outlet would give the recognized agency a standard 15% discount on the price of that space. But the agency would turn around and bill the client for the full 100% retail price. That 15% spread was the agency's sole source of revenue.
Oh, wow. So the more money the client spent on buying media, the more money the agency made.
It is a fundamental structural misalignment of incentives.
It really is. If an agency's entire livelihood, their ability to make payroll, depends entirely on persuading the client to spend more money on commissionable advertising space, how can the client ever trust the agency's objective advice?
They can't. Think about it. What if a client comes to an agency with a struggling product and the absolute best business advice the agency could give is, stop advertising, your product is flawed, take this $10 million, put it into R&D, fix the product, and come back to us in a year.
Under the commission system, an agency giving that incredibly valuable, honest advice would be actively bankrupting their own firm.
Exactly.
It's exactly like a financial advisor who operates on commission. If they only make money by steering you into high-fee, actively managed mutual funds, you can never fully trust their advice, compared to a fiduciary who charges a flat hourly rate and gives you objective counsel based purely on your best interests.
That's a perfect comparison.
Ogilvy wanted to be a fiduciary for his clients. He advocated for a flat fee structure so he could look a client in the eye, tell them to spend less money when appropriate, without hurting his own bottom line.
Treat your creative partner's profitability as an asset to your own business. Align the financial incentives so they are financially secure enough to give you pure, objective counsel.
And that philosophy leads directly into how you handle the daily expenses of experimentation, which brings us to the next rule. Don't haggle.
Right. Don't haggle.
Don't be stingy about paying for research. And crucially, don't expect the agency to pay for the dry holes drilled in your behalf.
This concept of the dry hole is borrowed from the oil drilling industry, and it is vital for understanding creative work.
Because you never know if you're going to strike oil.
Exactly. Creative work is inherently experimental. Not every idea works. Not every commercial turns out perfectly on the first take. Sometimes you drill a well and you don't strike oil.
Right.
Ogilvy argues that if the client refuses to pay for these failures, if they force the agency to absorb the cost of a commercial that didn't test well and needs to be completely remade, the client is actively sabotaging their own future success.
But let me put my CFO hat on for a second.
Oh, here we go.
If I hire an agency to shoot a commercial and they mess it up, or the concept just falls flat on camera, why on earth should my company pay to reshoot it? That's their mistake. In any other industry, if a contractor builds a wall wrong, they pay for the materials to tear it down and rebuild it.
The contractor analogy breaks down because building a wall is a known standardized process. Creating a piece of original communication that manipulates human behavior is an exploration into the unknown.
Ah, so it's more like R&D.
Yes. If you force the agency to eat the financial cost of a creative misfire, what you are actually doing is incentivizing extreme cowardice.
Because they'll be terrified of making a mistake.
Exactly. If an agency knows that a creative risk might fail, and that failure will cost them a massive sum of their own operating capital, They will simply stop taking risks. They will hide their
They
mistakes.
will only ever pitch you the safest, most boring, most predictable derivative ideas because those are financially secure for the agency.
Bingo. If you want breakthrough, risky, high reward creative work, you, the client, have to financially insulate the agency from the inevitable failures that come with that experimentation.
You have to fund the R&D.
Yeah.
And there are two incredible historical examples in the text that illustrate the cultural power of
Oh,
this.
the Lever Brothers story.
Yes. The first is Lever Brothers. They were launching a new detergent called Vim, and they had committed to spending $4 million, which was a staggering sum at the time, on television airtime to broadcast the commercial.
Huge investment.
But when they reviewed the first cut of the commercial, it wasn't quite perfect. Now, a cheap, haggling client would have just run it anyway, or demanded the agency fix it for free, which would have led to a rushed, resentful compromise.
Which would ruin the relationship.
Right. But Lever Brothers looked at that massive $4 million airtime investment and realized the actual creative asset had to be flawless to justify the media spend. So they proactively, voluntarily paid Ogilvy's agency to remake the commercial entirely from scratch.
They recognized the macro stakes. The media spend was the real investment. The production cost was just the key to unlock it.
Exactly. And the second example is perhaps even more poetic, and it involves Steuben Glass.
This is a beautiful story.
The head of the company, Arthur Houghton, told Ogilvy his singular job was to make the absolute best advertisements in the world, to match what they believed was the best glass in the world.
High standards.
Very. When the first set of color printing plates were produced, and these plates cost $1,200, which was a very significant chunk of budget in that era, they were slightly imperfect.
And Houghton just let Ogilvy physically break the expensive plates and start over.
His reasoning was beautiful. Steuben breaks imperfect glass too.
That is the ultimate flex of a high standards client.
They understand that perfection has a literal financial cost in raw materials, the dry holes, and they gladly pay it to achieve the final masterpiece. They don't haggle over the pursuit of excellence.
And that commitment to proper funding must extend to the overall campaign budget, which is Ogilvy's rule regarding underspending.
He is very blunt here.
He is. If your budget is simply too small, he uses the benchmark of $2 million in his era's context. Do not attempt a continuous national advertising campaign. You will just spread yourself too thin and achieve absolutely nothing.
He quotes Charlie Mortimer, the head of General Foods, who had this brilliant analogy for underspending. It's like buying a ticket 3/4 of the way to Europe. You have spent some money, but you do not arrive.
That perfectly captures it.
Think about how relevant that is for modern startups. A founder might have $50,000 and they try to run ads on Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, and sponsor a podcast all at once.
They spread the money so thin that no single demographic sees the ad enough times to care.
They bought a ticket to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Exactly. If you don't have the budget to do it right on a massive scale, don't do it at all. Concentrate your limited funds locally, target a very specific niche demographic, or simply save your money until you have the capital to cross the ocean.
Underspending is just setting fire to your capital.
That's all it is.
Okay, so we've built the foundation. We've hired, based on track record, we've established a healthy, fearless working environment with no committees. We've set standards to protect the geniuses, and we've funded the engine properly without haggling.
We have the perfect setup.
Now, where exactly should a client direct this expensive, well-oiled machine? What are we actually pointing the agency at? This brings us to the final phase: testing, nurturing, and pruning.
This phase really tests the emotional and analytical discipline of the client.
Okay, so let's start with the nurturing part.
We start with the concept of launching something entirely new. Ogilvy points out that launching a new product from scratch, what he calls creating a brand ab ovo, from the egg, is the most difficult, brain-taxing task an agency will ever face.
Because you're literally starting from zero.
It requires immense imagination to synthesize a brand personality out of thin air.
Right, because there's no history. There's no existing customer base to interview, no legacy to lean on. You are inventing a reality and trying to convince the public to step inside it.
Exactly. Because it is so difficult, clients must invest heavily in this creative launch phase. They must coddle the agency team doing this work because this initial DNA will dictate the entire future trajectory of the brand.
Coddle the goose that lays the golden egg.
Yes. But crucially, you don't just trust that initial creative spark blindly, no matter how brilliant the team is. You must verify it with reality.
Which leads to the absolute mandate: test everything.
You test your promise, you test your media buy, you test your headlines.
Let's explain how they actually did this before the internet, because I think it highlights the discipline required. They used split-run experiments.
Yes, a split-run experiment was the analog precursor to modern A/B testing on a website.
How did it work?
Before you committed millions of dollars to a national magazine campaign, you would test two different headlines. You would buy space in a single magazine, but arrange it so that half the copies printed contained headline A and the other half contained headline B.
Oh, that's clever.
Crucially, each ad would include a mail-in coupon for a sample, and the coupon for headline A would have a slightly different return address or code than headline B.
So they could literally just count the physical mail bags that came back to see which headline actually provoked human action.
Exactly. It wasn't about which ad the CEO liked better. It was about which ad actually sold the product.
And the statistic Ogilvy drops to justify this rigorous testing is absolutely terrifying. He says that 24 out of 25 new products fail in test markets. 24 out of 25.
That sheer volume of failure is precisely why rigorous testing is the ultimate safety net for those massive budgets we just discussed.
It's better to know early.
It is infinitely better and infinitely cheaper to have a product fail inconspicuously in a small test market, say, running a localized campaign in a single mid-sized city, than to launch it blindly, fueled by corporate ego, and have it fail spectacularly on a national scale.
Testing removes the executive's ego from the equation. It allows empirical data to tell you if the dog will actually eat the dog food.
Exactly.
But what happens when the dog isn't eating the dog food? What happens when a product is failing even after it's been launched and marketed?
That brings us to one of the toughest rules to swallow. Don't waste time on problem babies.
Ogilvy says you must stop obsessing over how to revive dying products.
Right.
Instead, he argues you must ruthlessly concentrate your time, your brains, and your money on making your successful products even more successful.
This strikes at the very heart of boardroom psychology.
It really does, and honestly, it feels totally counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, let's say I'm a product manager. I just spent 2 years developing a new software feature. It's struggling in the market. Isn't marketing's job to save it? Shouldn't I deploy my brilliant agency to figure out a new angle to turn it around? It feels like abandoning a sinking ship instead of fixing the leak.
The instinct to save the failing product is driven by the sunk cost fallacy and pure ego.
Because admitting defeat hurts.
You spent 2 years on it, you promised the board it would work, and admitting defeat feels like a personal failure. But we have to look at the macro opportunity cost for the business.
Okay, let's look at the resources.
Think about the finite resources you have. The time of your executive team, the highly expensive brainpower of your agency, and your marketing budget. If you dedicate the vast majority of those resources to trying to artificially resuscitate a fundamentally weak product that the market has already rejected, you are starving your winners of the fuel they need to dominate.
Because what is the true nature of marketing? It's a multiplier.
Exactly. Marketing is a multiplier, not a magic wand.
I love that. Not a magic wand.
If you have a great product with strong product market fit, brilliant marketing multiplies that success exponentially. It pours gasoline on a fire. But marketing cannot fix a fundamentally weak product.
It can't hide a bad product for long.
It cannot magically create sustained consumer demand where none naturally exists. 0 multiplied by 1,000,000 is still 0.
It takes immense corporate bravery to look at bad test results or declining sales, cut your losses, abandon your ego, and move on. The practical takeaway here is to rely on data over emotion.
You have to be ruthless.
Invest heavily at the birth of a new product, test it rigorously against reality, and mercifully cut what doesn't work so you can fully back your winners.
It requires a level of emotional detachment that very few executives possess. But the ones who do are the ones who build empires.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today. Let's synthesize all of this. If we look at these rules collectively, a really fascinating pattern emerges. Being a truly great client, the kind of client who actually gets world-class history-making work from external team, is basically a complete paradox.
It is entirely paradoxical. To be a great client, you must be simultaneously intensely involved and completely radically hands-off.
You have to be highly involved at the very beginning. You are deep in the weeds.
Setting the foundation.
Right. You have to spend days briefing the agency, opening the vault, teaching them the arcane economics of your industry, setting incredibly high standards, and ensuring they have the proper financial budget and profit margins to actually do the work.
Yeah.
You are meticulously setting the stage. But then you have to step completely out of the way.
You step away and you dismantle your own bureaucracy.
No committees.
You refuse to allow committees to water down the ideas. You refuse to backseat drive the creative execution. You tolerate the abrasive eccentricities of the geniuses doing the work.
You build a moat around them.
You create an environment entirely free of fear and threat. You lead without micromanaging the creative output.
And then, at the very end of the cycle, you re-engage with absolute ruthless objectivity. You test everything in the real world. You rely on the data rather than your own boredom. You give candid, blunt feedback about the work. And you mercilessly prune the products that aren't succeeding.
It is this beautiful, difficult dance of intense preparation, total creative surrender, and rigorous empirical review.
And that framework is why Ogilvy's advice from decades ago remains the absolute gold standard for managing creative professionals today. It is deeply rooted in unchangeable human psychology.
It really is timeless.
Which brings me to a final thought for you to chew on as we wrap up. We opened by talking about the frustration of being outsold by a competitor with a fraction of your budget.
Right, the nightmare scenario.
We've spent this time exploring how to build the perfect relationship with human creative genius. But consider the landscape we are operating in right now. We are entering a modern world where artificial intelligence can instantly generate 1,000 variations of mediocre or even good enough marketing copy and imagery at the push of a button.
The game is changing rapidly.
In that landscape, perhaps the true value of a business leader is shifting dramatically. Your primary job is no longer to be the judge of a creative execution itself. The machines can do that at scale.
So what is the job now?
Your ultimate job, your true competitive advantage, is mastering this exact framework. Your job is to provide the right foundational proprietary data, to structure the right strategic budgets, and above all, to cultivate the psychological safety required for true, unpredictable, irreplaceable human genius to thrive and do the things a machine never could.
The tools have changed, but the human psychology of creativity hasn't budged an inch.
It hasn't. That raises a vital question about where we go from here.
Yeah.
How do we adapt these deeply analog rules of human management to a highly automated future? How do you brief an algorithm versus a human being?
That is the million-dollar question.
That is exactly what we will be exploring next time. We are going to dive deep into how these timeless advertising principles apply when the agency might just be a server rack, and how to maintain the soul of your brand in the digital age. Until then, take a look in the mirror, trust your experts, and keep diving deep.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.